Chapter 489. What should he say? Should he say that he stabbed a knife into the heart of White Lotus and almost took her life? Should he say that he didn't mean it and was forced to do it? Or should he say that all of this seemed to be just a dream, a joke that could be laughed off? Lu Chen was silent for a moment and did not answer Su Qingjuan's question. Instead, he asked softly, "Can I go in and see her?" Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment and nodded. The two of them stood up. Immediately, Lu Chen followed Su Qingjun into the house. This was the first time that Lu Chen entered Su Qingjuan's room. Even when he was on the Kunlun mountain, although he had been Su Qingjuan's nominal disciple and built a thatched hut outside her cave residence, strictly speaking, he had never entered it. The furnishings in the room were clean and tidy. It seemed that they were all commonly used furniture. It could be seen that Su Qingjun was also a woman who loved cleanliness. However, the bed in the room looked a little messy. It was probably because White Lotus was lying on the bed. It should have been messed up when Su Qingjun was busy saving her. Lu Chen walked to the bed and saw White Lotus lying there with a pale face. The soft quilt covered her body up to her neck. Her eyes were tightly closed and her delicate eyebrows were slightly wrinkled. It seemed that she still felt a trace of pain in her coma. Her beautiful hair was a little messy. A few strands of black hair fell from the corner of her forehead and gently fell on her cheek. She looked a little fragile. Su Qingjun silently walked forward and gently lifted a corner of the quilt. She whispered, "Just now her clothes were stained with a lot of blood and her whole body was wet. It was really impossible to wear it, so I took my own clothes and put it on her first." Lu Chen glanced over and saw that White Lotus had indeed changed into a set of plain clothes. It looked loose and soft. It was probably the clothes that Su Qingjun usually wore when she slept. At the same time, from his angle, he could also see that at the edge of the clothes on her chest, White Lotus's body was already wrapped with white gauze. Naturally, it was what Su Qingjun had done to treat her. Lu Chen let out a long breath and turned to Su Qingjun and nodded. "It's really troublesome for you." Su Qingjun faintly said, "After all, younger sister Bai and I are from the same sect. Moreover, in terms of seniority, she is probably my teacher. So it is reasonable for me to save her. Moreover." She looked down at the wounds on White Lotus's body and then gently covered her with the quilt. She said, "White Lotus is after all still a girl. It is indeed inappropriate for a man like you to treat her." Lu Chen nodded and said, "It's good that you understand me." But Su Qingjun suddenly turned around and stared at Lu Chen. The emotions in her eyes seemed a little strange. Lu Chen's heart couldn't help but thump when she looked at him like that. Thinking about it, he didn't seem to have done anything shameful. He was a little stunned and said, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Su Qingjun stared at him for a moment. For some reason, her cheeks first blushed slightly. Then it returned to normal. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "I thought of something and I don't understand." Lu Chen said, "What's the matter?" Su Qingjun glanced at the unconscious White Lotus on the bed and said, "She was injured and unconscious. You adhered to the boundaries between men and women and sent her all the way to me. But that year on the Kunlun mountain, that time when I returned injured late at night, why didn't you do this, but..." Speaking till the end, her cheeks slightly blushed again and she didn't continue. But Lu Chen already understood what she meant. This time he was a little speechless and didn't know what to say. But looking at Su Qingjuan's unblinking eyes looking at him, it was obvious that she wanted to know the answer. Lu Chen felt a little helpless in his heart. After hesitating for a moment, he still sighed and said, "That years matter, actually at that time, when you went out, you more or less violated the curfew of the Kunlun party. This matter can't be publicized and I also didn't dare to alarm others." Anne. Hearing Lu Chen's words, Su Qingjun nodded slightly. Indeed, when she left the mountain that time, she violated the Kunlun's ban for her family, so it was not suitable to be publicized. But when she heard the last two words, and saw that Lu Chen wanted to say something, she couldn't help but ask again, "And what?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and finally said honestly, "And when I was on the Kunlun mountain, I didn't know any other women I was familiar with. The only one I was close to was Yi Tuan. But she lived too far away, distant water could not quench present thirst. Now it's different. You live close, and you are a woman I know, familiar with. Plus, White Lotus is a girl, so I hurried to send her over. It's all thanks to you. Looking at Lu Chen's solemn last words, Su Qingjuan's heart warmed for no reason. Then, she felt an inexplicable sense of loss. She sighed softly and said faintly, "Anyway, I'm not as good as her. You were worried about her reputation, but you didn't have to worry about mine. When she was injured, you ran to her in the rain and fed her rare elixirs." "Oh, that's right, when I was injured, you gave me the elixirs that you wanted from me. They were my own, right?" Lu Chen was dumbfounded and speechless for a moment. How could something so long ago be brought up again? But these words sounded a little awkward. But when he looked at Su Qingjuan's cold and calm face, he felt suffocated again. He could only say softly, "How can she be compared to you? Don't think too much." Su Qingjun glanced at him and said, "She can't be compared to me?" Lu Chen nodded and sighed, "You're such a smart woman, how can you not understand what I mean?" The light in Su Qingjuan's eyes seemed to flash for a moment, but then she restrained herself. The corners of her mouth slightly pursed, as if she wanted to scold him, but she quickly restrained herself. In the end, she just rolled her eyes at him and said, "You're full of empty words. Who knows which is true and which is false?" Lu Chen smiled and didn't argue. For so many years as a shadow, he had indeed lived the kind of life that Su Qingjun had just described. Sometimes, even he couldn't tell the difference between true and false, let alone others. However, Su Qingjun didn't continue on this topic. Instead, after a moment of silence, her expression suddenly became serious. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "Okay, let's not talk about this for now. Tell me first, on this celestial dragon mountain, how did White Lotus suffer such a serious injury?" Lu Chen became silent. Su Qingjun waited for a moment and asked again, "Also, when you brought her here just now, you really didn't turn over her clothes and wound. Then I'm curious, how did you know that her wound was poisoned and caused her to bleed non-stop? You have to know, when I was treating her just now, I couldn't recognize what kind of poison it was. Instead, you even took out an antidote that could detoxify it." She stared at Lu Chen with a trace of coldness on her face and said, "Why is that? What is your relationship with the person who injured her?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he smiled bitterly and said, "Okay, you're right, the person who injured her is me." Rumble. In the dark sky outside the house, there was a sudden clap of thunder. A gust of cold wind suddenly blew open the unlatched door and rushed into the house. The lit candle shook violently a few times and actually went out in an instant. The room was immediately plunged into darkness, and there were gusts of cold wind. It was also at this time, suddenly, Lu Chen and Su Qingjun almost at the same time, turned their heads to look outside the room. Outside the open and shaking door, there seemed to be only a vast and boundless darkness in the cold wind and rain. Chapter 490. The night was as deep as the sea. In the endless darkness, there seemed to be a pair of pitch-black eyes staring at the only remaining warm place in the darkness of the night. But in the bitter wind and rain, besides the sound of the wind and the cold powder of the rain that came with the wind, there was nothing unusual. Lu Chen turned his head and looked at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment and then shook her head slightly. Lu Chen frowned and then walked over. Holding the door frame, he looked at the darkness outside and slowly closed the door. A dim yellow light lit up behind him. He turned his head and saw that Su Qingjun had relit the candle. The candlelight shone on her beautiful face, reflecting a strange and gentle halo. She looked up at Lu Chen and calmly said, "You still haven't answered the question I just asked you." "It's me." Lu Chen took a deep breath and said, "I hurt her." Su Qingjuan's eyes were slightly cold, but she didn't show too much shock. It seemed that she had more or less guessed before. At this moment, she was staring at Lu Chen. After a while, she said in a low voice, "Why?" Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, "It's a long story. Can I tell you later?" As he spoke, he saw Su Qingjuan's expression darken. He hurriedly said, "Look, I sent her here in such a hurry. No matter what, I don't look like I'm going to harm her, do I? At worst, you can wait until she wakes up and ask her. If she still has any dissatisfaction with me, then you can vent your anger at me." Su Qingjun looked at him for a moment. Her expression softened a little. Then she nodded and said, "Okay, but you sent her here and got me involved. You have to give me an explanation." Lu Chen nodded and said, "I understand. It's just that there are some things right now, it's hard to say. I'll definitely explain to you what happened today in the future." Su Qingjun nodded silently. It seemed that she had accepted Lu Chen's words. After a while, she seemed to feel a little emotional and murmured, "First it was Exian, then my family was in a mess, and now White Lotus has become like this. Lu Chen, oh, Lu Chen, are all the women around you unlucky?" Lu Chen was stunned. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he smiled bitterly and remained silent. Su Qingjun felt a little strange. She looked at him and asked, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen silently shook his head. After a while, he sighed and said, "You are not the first person to say this to me." As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't say anything further. He just turned around and walked to the door. After pausing for a moment, he still opened the door and walked out. Su Qingjun looked at his back and revealed a trace of surprise and bewilderment. It rained for an entire night. In the early morning when the sky was slightly bright, even though the rain had become slightly lighter, it still showed no signs of stopping, and it was still pattering down ceaselessly. It caused the heavens and the earth to become hazy, and it caused the entire city to seem as if it was enveloped in a misty rain. Old Ma turned over on his bed and muttered sleepily. But in his daze, his slightly opened eyes suddenly saw a blurry black figure not far away from his bed. Old Ma's body stopped for a moment and he seemed to have not reacted. His eyes even closed, and he seemed to intend to sleep for a while longer. But after a short while, he suddenly frowned and opened his eyes to look. Shockingly, he saw a person sitting at the side of his bed. This time, Old Ma's shock was really no small matter. He exclaimed in surprise as his entire body suddenly sprung up, and his movement was so nimble that it was astounding. At the same time, he used one hand to protect his body while the other had already swung out. A dim light flashed in the center of his palm. At this instant, his face was filled with killing intent, and he looked as if he'd already made a killing move with all his strength. But in the next moment, his gaze suddenly squinted as he saw that the person that had appeared at the head of his bed like a ghost was actually Lu Chen. Old Ma was shocked again, and he hurriedly tried his best to restrain the strength of his wrist. But under the situation where he used too much strength, his fat body staggered and immediately fell off the bed with a plop. He firmly lay down beside Lu Chen like a dog gnawing on mud. At the same time, there was a burst of crashing sounds around him. It turned out that the bedding, mosquito net, and other things on the bed were also dragged down by him in a hurry, and suddenly it was a mess. Lu Chen sat on a stool and did not move at all. He only lowered his head to look at Old Ma's embarrassed appearance. Old Ma cursed and pressed his hands on the ground. He jumped up and then pointed at Lu Chen and shouted, "Bastard, you appeared on my bed like a ghost. Are you trying to scare me to death?" Lu Chen looked up and down at Old Ma and said, "You're so energetic, nothing will happen to you. Get lost." Old Ma shouted in a loud voice, and then he picked up the bedding on the ground and put it back on the bed. He still scolded, "Are you crazy?" With a lingering fear, he turned his back to Lu Chen and casually folded the bedding. Old Ma suddenly felt that something was not quite right, because during this time, Lu Chen did not quarrel with him as usual, but remained silent. Old Ma turned around with some doubts and looked at Lu Chen. After a careful look, he found that Lu Chen did look a little strange. He was still wearing the clothes he wore yesterday, and his whole body was completely wet. Even now, there were still drops of water constantly dripping from his clothes, and the ground under him had become wet. This man's face looked very calm, or a little indifferent, but Old Ma, who was very familiar with him, could see the faint waves in the depths of Lu Chen's eyes. He frowned, and there was a bad premonition in his heart. He asked in a low voice, "What's wrong, what happened?" Lu Chen slightly lowered his head, and after a moment of silence, he said, "Old Ma, I think that damn Baldy, he may really be a madman." Old Ma coughed, sat down on the bed behind him, and frowned. "Don't talk nonsense to me so early in the morning. Can you make this kind of joke?" Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "I'm not joking." Old Ma was startled, and he stared at him for a while. Suddenly, he jumped up and strode to the window of the room. He pushed the door open and looked outside, then closed it tightly. Then he ran to the door and opened it to look outside. Finally, he turned around and locked the door again. Then, he took a deep breath, strode to Lu Chen, and growled in a low voice, "Are you crazy? You came to my bed early in the morning to say this?" Lu Chen said, "I'm not crazy, he's the one who's crazy." Old Ma said, "What's wrong with Perfected Immortal?" Lu Chen said, "He forced me to kill White Lotus." Old Ma shouted without hesitation, "What's so strange about that? If it were me, I would have already killed that woman. I asked you to do it, but it was just to test you. What's wrong with that?" Lu Chen was stunned. He looked up at Old Ma, and the room suddenly became quiet. The two looked at each other. After a while, Lu Chen said in a low voice, "Do you think so too?" Old Ma sneered and said, "The person who should be asking is you. Since when did you not think so?" Chapter 491. Lu Chen looked at Old Ma, and Old Ma stared at Lu Chen. After a long time, the morning light outside the window brightened, and the pitter-patter of the wind and rain sounded incessantly. Lu Chen finally turned his gaze away. "When did you change? People always change, right? But, is the you after the change good or bad?" Lu Chen didn't know. He was a bit confused. For many years, he thought that his will was unwavering. He thought about many things, but he never thought that today's scene would happen. After a while, he whispered to Old Ma, "You're right, it's my problem. If it was me 10 years ago, White Lotus would have been a dead person by now." Old Ma looked at him and thought of what this man had experienced all these years. Suddenly, his heart softened. He sighed and patted Lu Chen's shoulder, saying, "Actually, it's not a big deal. You don't have to worry." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and suddenly said, "Damn Baldy, he doesn't believe me? So he deliberately used this kind of method to test me?" Old Ma rolled his eyes, saying, "What are you talking about? Do you have a deep friendship with White Lotus?" "No, I don't think so. If you ask me, even if Lord Jinjuan is worried about you and wants to test you, it's more reliable to find that sleepy and gluttonous black dog than to use White Lotus, right? Or, is there a secret between you and her that I don't know?" Seeing Old Ma looking at him with a strange expression, Lu Chen immediately shook his head and said angrily, "Don't talk nonsense. My relationship with White Lotus can't be cleaner. You know it from the beginning to the end. There's no secret." Old Ma nodded and said thoughtfully, "What you said is somewhat reasonable." Lu Chen glared at him, stood up, and walked to the window. He opened the window and stretched his body a few times, and his expression gradually calmed down. Although he looked calm on the outside, his heart was in turmoil. There was almost no one in this world who understood perfected Lord Tianlan better than him. In fact, even he himself did not dare to say that he completely understood his master. Most of the time, this high and mighty soul formation perfected cultivator was like a god, mysterious and unapproachable. Now that I think about it, there seems to be something strange last night. Lu Chen turned to Old Ma and said, "From the beginning to the end, White Lotus didn't fight back at all. She just stood there the whole time." Old Ma frowned and said, "What are you trying to say? Are you saying that White Lotus was secretly threatened by someone?" "I don't know, at least not now." Lu Chen looked at the rain outside the window again. After a long while, he suddenly said, "Probably for a person like him, it is still too difficult to completely trust someone. Over the years, the damn Baldy has seen a lot of deception and intrigue. What's more, he is actually the biggest shadow leader in the world. Old Ma walked over and looked at Lu Chen's face from the side. He saw that there was a somewhat complicated expression on his face, and at the same time, his voice became a little low. What is a shadow? Shadows are born to do things that betray. They can betray all the people and things that can be betrayed for their original goal, and they will do anything to achieve their goal. After seeing this kind of thing too many times, they probably can't easily trust others anymore. Old Ma raised a hand and patted Lu Chen on the shoulder. It seemed that he wanted to comfort him, but when the words came to his mouth, no sound came out. In the end, it only turned into a sigh. The more outstanding the shadow, the more intense their betrayal. Just like me, you are different. Old Ma immediately interrupted Lu Chen's words and said in a low voice, even if outsiders don't know about your achievements, Lord Immortal will definitely remember it. He has always treated you differently from others. Otherwise, he wouldn't have accepted you as his disciple with such great fanfare and announced it to the world. Lu Chen nodded, smiled, and said, you're probably right. But if it were you, even if you view me in a different light, every time you see me, wouldn't you think that this disciple of yours once killed the master who doted on him the most and betrayed the sect that nurtured him with everything it had? Could he be thinking that this disciple of his might be a fickle person? Old Ma said with a bitter smile, don't say that. Otherwise, no matter what, you won't be standing here. Anyway, believe me, Lord Immortal is still willing to trust you. At most, he just wants to arrange things carefully and test you more. You have to know that the old man has such a huge foundation in this life. If he can't find a completely trustworthy disciple, how can he pass on everything to you? Old Ma's palm pressed on his shoulder tightened and he whispered, listen to me, Lu Chen. Don't be too anxious. Lord Immortal really doesn't have any bad intentions towards you. Lu Chen glanced at him, and Old Ma looked at him calmly. After a while, the expression on Lu Chen's face also relaxed. He nodded slowly and then said, I know. Old Ma breathed a sigh of relief, and the tense expression on his face also relaxed a lot. However, with his chubby face, he turned around and muttered at the same time, it's so early in the morning. Only you have so many things to do. By the way, yesterday I also asked about some clues about that matter. In fact. But I still feel a little strange. Lu Chen suddenly said, forget about the damn Baldy. After hearing what you said just now, I also let it go. But if last night was a test for me, why was it White Lotus? Old Ma's expression slightly changed, and he said, what do you mean? Lu Chen glanced at him and said, you just said that if he really wanted to see whether I was completely obedient to him, it would be more useful to use Atsu to threaten me than White Lotus. But he just wanted to use White Lotus. Speaking of this, Lu Chen paused and then whispered, it seems to me that the damn Baldy thinks that if I make up my mind to kill White Lotus, I can prove all my innocence, and he will completely trust me in the future. But I have nothing to do with White Lotus. What secret does this woman, White Lotus, have on earth? Why does the damn Baldy think that she is so important to me, even more than all the people around me? He slowly raised his head and looked at Old Ma, his eyes full of doubts. Old Ma also had some doubts on his face, but then he shook his head and said, don't look at me like that. I am not a person who knows everything. About White Lotus, in fact, when we were in Kunlun Mountain, I have already helped you investigate once. I have told you everything I know. She is a person from a distant branch of the Bai family. Because of her natural talent, she was accepted as a disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan. She has nothing to do with you at all. Lu Chen was silent for a long time, and finally sighed. He could not think of a reason. After shaking his head, he temporarily gave up on this confusing mystery. Then, as if he thought of something, he frowned at Old Ma and said, by the way, you just said that you have found something to tell me? Chapter 492. Old Ma was stunned for a moment, then he nodded and said, yes, I wanted to talk to you last night, but I couldn't find you. After I came back, I waited for you for a long time, but you didn't come back. Lu Chen said, I was in Kunlun at that time. What's the matter? Old Ma said, it's about the woman named Song Hui. Lu Chen's expression changed and said, what did you find? When I asked you about this a few days ago, didn't you say that no one in the Grand Chancellor still remembers this woman? Old Ma grunted and said, it's true that the Dezayuan is like this, but yesterday I asked someone to find an old man who used to work in the Dezayuan. Now he's old and has nothing to do. He lives in the immortal city, and there's no one to take care of him. He's living in poverty. I went to find him and gave him some money. He was very happy, so he said a few more words. Lu Chen frowned and said, what did he say? Old Ma said, he said that he did remember that there was such a young woman in the Grand Chancellor, but because Song Hui didn't work in the Grand Chancellor for long, she had an accident on a business trip. In addition, this woman didn't come from a famous sect, nor did she have a famous family background, so she was quickly forgotten. As for him, he also felt that this woman died a little pitiful, and her life experience was a little similar to his, so he kept a little impression. Lu Chen nodded and said, what does he remember about Song Hui? Old Ma pondered for a moment and said, in fact, it's what I said before. She came from an ordinary small sect and entered Zhengxiameng by chance, but she didn't have much success. She was just an ordinary person. Of course, maybe there will be other developments in the future, but unfortunately, she passed away too early, so there's almost nothing left. This sounded a little depressing, but Lu Chen's eyes suddenly lit up and said, wait a minute, do you mean you know the name of that small sect? Old Ma smiled and said with a slightly proud expression, I've already been there. Lu Chen also said with a smile, it seems that the sword is not old. Not bad. Old Ma looked calm and said, that sect is called Flying Goose Sect. It occupies a few rooms in the Celestial City. Once it is connected, it will be the headquarters. There are only about a dozen people in total. Moreover, their cultivation of Dao techniques and whatnot seems to be mediocre. Lu Chen nodded. There were countless cultivators in the vast land of the Divine Prefecture, and the number of cultivation sects were as many as the hairs on an ox. Apart from those famous sects with a long history and great influence, small sects like this were actually extremely common and not strange. Therefore, he quickly asked, who did you go to? Did you get any information? For some reason, Old Ma sighed softly at this time. After a while, he said, I went to ask, but it seems that all the cultivators in the Fian sect are young. They just joined the sect in the past 10 years, so they don't know Song Hui. In the end, the head is the oldest, so I have some impression of her. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said with some emotion, life seems to be like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. There are only a few waves, but no one can remember. Old Ma glanced at him and said, most people in the world are like this. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and waved his hand to signal Old Ma to continue. Old Ma said, the head said that when Song Hui was accepted into the sect, he took a fancy to her aptitude. But in fact, when Song Hui joined the sect, she was already a little old. If she was slow in building her foundation, her future achievements would not be too high. But she is a small sect, so they really don't care so much, so they took her in. The head said that when Song Hui was accepted as a disciple, her parents had already passed away. Her own life was also difficult, so Song Hui was very happy to be accepted into the Fian sect. Later on, she was also very respectful to the head. She could be regarded as a favorite disciple of the head, so he still remembers her after so many years. Lu Chen frowned and said, what about the others? Nothing else? Isn't it the same as what the person in the Dazayard said? Old Ma shrugged and said, Song Hui was originally an ordinary woman. What else do you want? Oh, by the way. Old Ma suddenly seemed to think of something and said, the head mentioned another thing. He said that Song Hui had a younger sister, and she was very young. The age difference was almost 10 or 20 years. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said with a slightly solemn expression, she had a younger sister? Where is she now? What is her name? Old Ma sighed and said with a bit of pity on his face, I don't know. I heard from the head that after Song Hui died in an accident, her younger sister, who was only 4 years old, suddenly disappeared and there was no news of her since then. No matter what they did, they couldn't find the little girl's whereabouts. At such a young age, she had no relatives. In this difficult and cruel world, she was probably going to die prematurely. As old Ma thought of this, he also felt a little sorry for the lonely little girl. But when he looked up at Lu Chen again, he was stunned. He saw that Lu Chen had a somewhat complicated expression on his face and seemed to be in a daze. "Hey, what's wrong with you?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, before he gently exhaled a breath of air. After which, he spoke in a faint voice, "Young and lonely, wandering in the world, and then disappearing without a trace. These words seemed to sound somewhat familiar to me." Old Ma was stunned. The rain that had been raining all night finally stopped. The air became fresh, and even the blowing wind seemed to carry a bit of moisture. Lu Chen and Old Ma walked up the mountain. At the same time, Lu Chen whispered to Old Ma, "Right now, we still have to focus on hunting down the remnants of the evil cult. As for Song Hui, you don't have to worry about it for now." Old Ma was a little surprised. "Don't you want to investigate any more?" Lu Chen was silent for a while, and then he raised his head and looked into the distance. He saw the towering and majestic celestial dragon mountain standing towering between the heavens and the earth like a giant, and there were countless clouds coiling around the mountain. He retracted his gaze and said, "Don't investigate anymore." Old Ma shrugged. "Up to you." The two separated when they reached the top of the mountain. Lu Chen went directly to Su Qingjuan's residence. Thinking about what happened last night, Lu Chen felt a little complicated. He hesitated for a moment before going up and knocking on the door. After a while, footsteps were heard from inside the door. The door was immediately opened and Su Qingjun appeared at the door. Seeing that it was Lu Chen, Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Come in." Lu Chen walked in, but before he could greet her, he heard Su Qingjun say as she closed the door, "White Lotus has woken up." Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then nodded and said, "Okay, then I'll go see her." Su Qingjun glanced at him and silently walked over. The door of the bedroom was unlatched, so she quickly walked in. Then Lu Chen, who followed her in, saw White Lotus on the bed. Perhaps she was startled by the footsteps. White Lotus, who had her eyes closed, opened her eyes and looked over. At a glance, she saw Lu Chen, who was beside Su Qingjun, and was immediately shocked. Lu Chen slowly walked over and sat by the bed. After a moment, he laughed dryly and raised his hand. "Are you okay?" "Not good." White Lotus said, "You just stabbed me last night. How can I be okay?" Chapter 493. Lu Chen was choked by White Lotus's blunt words. After shaking his head, he asked White Lotus, "Why didn't you dodge last night?" "I didn't really use my full strength." "You could've," White Lotus interrupted him and asked, "Then why did you want to kill me?" Lu Chen wanted to say something but hesitated. He couldn't really tell the two women in this room that it was Supreme Tianlan's order. It was up to him whether he believed it or not. Once he said it, it would probably cause a lot of trouble. White Lotus had already fallen into it, but Su Qingjun obviously had nothing to do with these things. Lu Chen didn't want to add this kind of trouble to Su Qingjun at all. At this moment, he even regretted bringing White Lotus to Su Qingjun last night. However, it was useless to say this now. Lu Chen pondered for a moment and then stared at White Lotus's weak and pale face lying on the bed, saying, "I know it's a little strange to say this now, but I really don't want to kill you. Let's talk about it later." White Lotus turned her head away and said, "Anyway, you can't answer my question, so I don't need to say anything more to you." Lu Chen sighed. At this point, there was basically no way to continue the conversation. Speaking of which, no matter how good-tempered one was, it was unlikely that one would be amiable to a person who had just stabbed him not long ago, right? Lu Chen softened his voice and said, "Last night, I brought you here with the intention of keeping a distance between men and women. I couldn't treat your injuries, and I was afraid that it would ruin your reputation, so I came to find Qingjun for help. Now that your injuries have almost stabilized, why don't I take you to another place to stay? Su Qingjun, who had been silent since entering the door, had a trace of surprise on her face at this moment. She glanced at Lu Chen. White Lotus, who was in front, said without hesitation, I'm not going. I'm staying here and not going anywhere. Lu Chen frowned and said, this is Qingjun's house. If we continue to stay here, it will be bad if we bring trouble to her. White Lotus snorted and said, I don't trust you now. Lu Chen wanted to persuade her again, but at this moment, Su Qingjun, who was standing at the side, walked over and said to him softly, forget it. If she wants to stay here, then let her stay. It's not a big deal. Lu Chen raised his head and was about to speak when White Lotus smiled at Su Qingjun and said, that's great. Thank you, Sister Su. Su Qingjun smiled and shook her head, saying, we are all from the same sect, such a small matter is not worth mentioning. Also, you are Hakushin Jinkuan's last disciple. In terms of seniority, you are a generation older than me. I don't deserve to be called sister by you. Bai Lian chuckled and said, my master passed away a long time ago. What use do I have for this useless seniority? Sister Su, you are my great benefactor last night. It is only right for me to call you sister. Su Qingjuan's heart shook for no reason. She subconsciously looked to the side and saw that Lu Chen's expression suddenly became a little gloomy, as if he had thought of something unpleasant. Walking out of the house and all the way to the door, Lu Chen stopped and turned to face Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun also stopped beside him and looked at him with a pair of bright eyes. Lu Chen's face showed a bit of apology and said in a low voice, I'm really sorry. I didn't think that she would actually stay here today and not leave. If I had known, I wouldn't have troubled you last night. Now that things have become like this, Su Qingjun shook her head and said, I just said, it's nothing. You don't need to take it to heart. After a pause, she said again, besides, she is staying here with me. I don't see any big trouble. Is there something you haven't told me? Lu Chen was speechless. After a while, he smiled bitterly and said, it's not big trouble. Don't worry. Su Qingjun responded indifferently. She then said goodbye to him and turned to go back. Hey, Qingjun. Lu Chen called out from behind her. What's wrong? Su Qingjun turned back to look. She only heard Lu Chen say with a sincere expression, recently, when are you free to stay at home? I want to come over every day to see White Lotus. When her injuries are slightly better, I will immediately take her away and not let her bother you anymore. Is that okay? Su Qingjun was slightly surprised and looked at Lu Chen. After a moment of silence, she nodded and said, okay, you can come. I don't have anything important to do right now. Most of the time, I stay at home. You can come whenever you want. Okay. Lu Chen agreed with a smile and then turned to leave. Su Qingjun stared at his back for a while until Lu Chen was far away. Only then did she close the door and return to the bedroom. Just 2 or 3 steps into the room, Su Qingjun heard White Lotus complaining, this guy is too hypocritical. He likes to pretend all day long. He even said he would take me away every day to see my injuries. My injuries are nothing. He has never insisted on accompanying me. If I were to say that he might have come to see you, some people would believe it. Su Qingjun was startled for a moment. Then, she shook her head. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly. There seemed to be a flash of light in the depths of her eyes. Although he encountered this inexplicable and depressing strange thing last night, Lu Chen did not directly rush to Kunlun Temple to settle the score with the damn baldy. After leaving Su Qingjuan's residence, he acted as if nothing had happened. He did things as usual and went directly to the prison in Fuyunji, ready to continue tracking the whereabouts of the remnants of the devil cult. Except for old Ma, he never told anyone about what happened in front of Kunlun Temple that night, so no one suspected him. He began to live the same life day after day. Early in the morning, he would go to Su Qingjuan's place to visit White Lotus and chat with Su Qingjun. Then, he would go to Kunlun Temple or Fuyunji prison, all to deal with the devil cult. It could be said that now, many people could see that perfected Lord Tianlan had gradually placed the heavy responsibility of dealing with the devil cult on Lu Chen's shoulders. At the same time, a strange rumor began to spread in the Fuyun Department's prison. It was said that the esteemed Supreme's disciple was only interested in hunting down the ghost elder. In order to achieve this goal, only one person could speak up, and that person was Chen He. After Lu Chen brought Chen He to the quiet room and locked him up alone, no one was allowed to go in to see him. And Lu Chen himself would go to Chen He alone for 2 to 4 hours every day. As for what they did and what they said in between, no one knew. Many prison guards who had interrogated Chen He sneered at Lu Chen's actions. Of course, this was said behind his back. No matter what he did on the surface, he still had to give perfected Lord Tianlan face, right? Even they could not pry open Chen He's mouth. What right did Lu Chen, a newcomer, have to open his mouth? If he really got the information out so easily, wouldn't it seem that the prison guards were all idiots? But about 5 days later, another rumor suddenly spread from the prison, shocking everyone. It seemed that Chen He had opened his mouth and told Lu Chen all the secrets and information he knew. For a moment, undercurrents were surging inside and outside of Fuyunji. Everyone in the prison was even more shocked. Chapter 494. When the news that Chen He, who had always been as tough as iron, suddenly opened his mouth spread out in the prison of Fuyunji, a lot of people were alarmed. For a moment, there was no telling how many people were paying attention to the prison of Fuyunji both openly and secretly. However, things did not go as many people expected. On the day that Chen He's mouth was leaked, Lu Chen had taken the important criminal away from the prison of Fuyunji in an odd way. This instantly shocked countless people. Even the Floating Clouds Agency was in an uproar. It must be known that although the Floating Clouds Agency was founded by True Lord Tianlan and they had been loyal and devoted to this famous True Lord for many years, ever since Lu Chen suddenly ascended to the position and became True Lord Tianlan's only successor and disciple, the relationship between the Floating Clouds Agency, which was led by Shuang, and this upstart who had ascended to the heavens in a single step was rather subtle. On the surface, everybody was still polite and close to each other when they met. After all, they were all on the same side. However, in private, inside Fuyunji, many voices were already spreading to Shui Ying's side, expressing their dissatisfaction. For so many years, it had been Fuyunji that had fought against the devil cult with mountains of corpses and oceans of blood. It was widely acknowledged in the world of cultivators that Fuyunji was the leading force against the devil cult too. However, right now, although it did not seem to have been announced to the public, Lu Chen, who had not joined Fuyunji yet, had begun meddling in the hunting of the devil cult and was showing signs that he was going to seize all the power. In the decades since Lord Tianlan founded Fuyunji, it had gradually developed into a powerful organization that was powerful enough to look down on the entire Zhangxiameng. With such a development, there was no telling how many people had benefited from it. Although Lu Chen looked polite on the surface, his actual actions showed that he was going to seize the fruits of benefits. Even though he was Lord Tianlan's disciple, his subordinates quickly disliked him. Of course, Lord Tianlan's position was too high and his reputation was too great. Nobody dared to say anything to him. However, Lu Chen was just an ordinary person. Who would listen to him so easily? As a result, the Floating Clouds Company quickly responded. While sending people outside to politely ask for Lu Chen's release, the Floating Clouds Company's internal leaders, led by Shuang, grabbed the people from the prison and scolded them harshly. Everyone said, "Have you prison guards stayed in that dark dungeon for too long? Have you all become stupid? The safest place in the world to imprison the devil cult's evildoers was the prison in Fuyunji. How could they just let him be taken away so easily?" Not to mention that Chen He was probably the only captive who knew the whereabouts of Elder Gui. What if something happened to him if he was taken away? What if the trail was cut off and they could never catch that old tortoise again? Can you idiots who look after the prison bear this responsibility? This series of questions that came like a barrage of bullets frightened the prisoners and guards. One by one, they knelt on the ground and complained. Then, one of them boldly told the truth. He said that they had tried to stop him that day. How could they dare to let such an important criminal go? If something happened to him, would they still want to live? But what? Shuang and many other Fuyunji leaders asked in shock and anger. But Lu Chen, that bastard, suddenly took out Lord Tianlan's personal keepsake. And as if he knew that it was not easy to explain, he actually took out a personal order from Lord Tianlan. It clearly stated that the criminal Chen He was to be taken away by Lu Chen. No matter how strong Fuyunji was, no matter how great their influence was, Lord Tianlan was still their sky. No matter what, they could not surpass him. Shuang and the others looked at each other, then ordered someone to take the personal letter and pass it around. After a while, in the silent and oppressive atmosphere, Shuang stood up and expressionlessly said, "It is indeed Lord Tianlan's handwriting." Then, she turned around and left. Zhangxianmeng was the most powerful organization in the vast cultivation world of the Divine Continent. There were many experts and countless cultivators. What was interesting was that in such a powerful alliance, it was like a wall with holes in all directions. There were almost no secrets that could be kept. What happened in Fuyunji spread very quickly. Of course, this kind of thing was not particularly open to the public. Some people with hidden power and great abilities naturally knew about it. As for many people who were not powerful enough, they did not know about it. In the news that spread, there were some vivid descriptions that made people feel as if they were there. In particular, the Fuyunji leaders who held high positions, especially the group of old ministers and old confidants led by Shuang, made people feel that there was a gap and conflict between these powerful people and Sky's Shadow, who was very likely to inherit Lord Tianlan's huge foundation in the future. In the past few decades, this was the first time that something like this had happened under Lord Tianlan, who was at the peak of his power. After Lu Chen took Chen He out of Fuyunji's prison, of course, he did not just find a random place to lock him up. In fact, the people in Fuyunji claimed that this prison was the safest place in the world to lock up the remnants of the devil cult. This was also one of the reasons why the people in Fuyunji were angry. But soon, everyone was speechless. Because according to the news that came, Lu Chen carried Chen He, who was tied up like a dumpling from head to toe, out of Fuyunji's prison, and directly entered the Kunlun Hall. Then, the news that came was that he found a sturdy room at the side of the hall and threw Chen He inside. This time, the people in Fuyunji looked at each other, speechless for a long time. No matter how tight the security of Fuyunji's prison was, it could not be compared to Lord Tianlan's, could it? If there was a safer place in the world than Fuyunji's prison to lock up the devil cult's prisoners, it would probably be beside Lord Tianlan. In short, although Lu Chen's action made many people dissatisfied, in the end, no one could say anything, so the criticism gradually subsided. And in the midst of this uproar, Lord Tianlan did not say a word from beginning to end, as if he did not know what was happening below. It was not until the third day after Chen He was caught and brought to the Kunlun Hall that Lord Tianlan called Lu Chen over and asked him, "I say, you've made such a big commotion, why don't you go and arrest him?" Lu Chen asked, "Arrest who?" Lord Tianlan said, "Old tortoise, haven't you always wanted to catch that person and then eradicate the devil cult?" Lu Chen snorted and said, "That's your idea, isn't it? Hasn't everything you've done over the years been for this purpose?" Lord Tianlan laughed and did not deny it. He said, "More or less. Of course, I hope so too." Lu Chen nodded and said, "I know what I'm doing. Don't worry, I won't let you down." Lord Tianlan stared at him for a moment, then slowly nodded and said, "Okay." With that, he turned around and walked away. But just as he took 2 steps, he suddenly heard Lu Chen's voice behind him. "Oh yes, I have another question." "Master? Master?" Perfected Lord Tianlan's footsteps paused for a moment and he turned to look at Lu Chen. "I've never heard you call me that before. It's rare for you to do so today. Why, what do you want to ask me?" Lu Chen took a light breath and asked calmly, "I want to ask you, many years ago, when I was an orphan who wandered the streets without parents, did you take in anyone else besides me?" Lord Tianlan suddenly narrowed his eyes and stared at Lu Chen with his deep eyes, but he did not say anything immediately. For a moment, the huge Kunlun Great Hall fell into silence. Chapter 495. Yes. After an unknown period of time, perfected Lord Tianlan opened his mouth. His tone sounded extremely calm and gentle, as if he was talking about a trivial matter. You're the first orphan that I've taken in and nurtured. Over the years, I've nurtured a few more people. My method of nurturing them is similar to yours. Lu Chen took a deep breath and looked at perfected Lord Tianlan. I've never heard you mention these things before, including the people in Fuyunji, Old Ma and Shuang. You didn't mention them either. They don't know either, perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently. Lu Chen was rather surprised. Why? Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his head and looked at the distant sky outside the hall. They're all dead. What's there to mention? Other than me, no one else knows about this. You're the second person to know about this. They're all dead? Lu Chen was stunned. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. His expression was rather indifferent as he said, life and death are just a thin line for those who work as shadows. There's only 1 in 10,000 people who can be as outstanding as you. Be it in terms of cultivation, talent or temperament, you have to be the best and most unyielding. Otherwise, you'll either not be able to overcome the difficulties that you have to endure in cultivation, or you'll die a violent death due to carelessness in hiding. There are too many such cases. At the end of his sentence, his expression finally revealed a hint of regret as he shook his head slightly. The corners of Lu Chen's eyes twitched slightly. He seemed to still be in disbelief. Other than me, everyone else is dead? They're all dead. Lu Chen fell silent. After a while, he said, do you still remember their names? I don't remember. Dead people don't need names. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at this disciple of his calmly. You're not a newbie. After being a shadow for so long, you should understand these things. Even if it was you, if you had unfortunately exposed yourself and died in the evil sect, today, no one would mention you again. Lu Chen was silent. After a while, he said in a low voice, I understand. It's just that when I occasionally think about these things, I still feel that it's a little unfair. Perfected Lord Tianlan turned around and walked into the depths of the hall. At the same time, his voice rang out. How can there be so much true fairness in this world? You've seen those who were born with good lives, but you've also seen those who had worse luck than you. They were all orphans, but how many of them died on the streets back then? So don't think too much. Now that you've made a name for yourself, just enjoy your life. Don't think about those unhappy things in the past. As the voice gradually weakened, perfected Lord Tianlan's tall figure walked into the shadows in the depths of the hall, seemingly about to become one with the darkness. Lu Chen looked at his back and suddenly shouted, what about that matter? What should we do next? Perfected Lord Tianlan's figure disappeared. Only his voice floated over. Just do as you think. Oh. Lu Chen responded indifferently. Lu Chen's act of forcibly taking away a wanted criminal from Fuyunji's prison had attracted a lot of criticism, and it had also caused undercurrents to surge in Xianxiameng. However, these disturbances and dissatisfactions, both overt and covert, ceased after people found out that Lu Chen had actually thrown the criminal into the Kunlun Palace Hall. It was not an exaggeration to say that perfected Lord Tianlan was the most famous perfected lord of the divine transformation realm in Xianxiameng. Why would people offend such a great god? In short, if there was any dissatisfaction in their hearts, they would hide it secretly. This matter would wait and see. Who told him to have a good master? Correspondingly, Lu Chen soon decided not to live in the house at the foot of the mountain at Shima Bridge, and directly moved into the Kunlun Palace Hall. His decisiveness was simply a case of sailing with the wind. He did not care about the issue of face at all. Even Old Ma was amazed by his decisiveness. As for the black dog at the foot of the mountain, Old Ma might have found a large cart to transport it over. Anyway, in the Kunlun Palace Hall, perfected Lord Tianlan and his disciple were the most powerful. Even if perfected Jianghu personally issued the no-dog order, it could not control this place. The Kunlun Palace Hall was naturally much larger than the house at the foot of the mountain. Atsu seemed very satisfied with this place. It was very excited to come here and strolled around. After Lu Chen warned it not to leave the scope of the Kunlun Palace Hall, he took old Ma to the place where Chen He was imprisoned. "Where is White Lotus?" Old Ma, who was walking on the road, asked Lu Chen, "Is she still living with Su Qingjun?" "Yes, she is staying there and not leaving. She probably found that although Su Qingjun is cold, she is actually more reliable than the two of us." "What are you talking about? I am different from you." Old Ma complained, then said, "Now there is a lot of talk outside, guessing what Chen He said to you. What are you going to do next?" "Wait to catch him." They arrived at the quiet room in front. Lu Chen walked over with Old Ma, pushed the door open, and walked in. At first glance, Old Ma saw Chen He, who was lying on the ground, tied up like a dumpling and unable to move at all. He was staring at Lu Chen with an angry and vicious gaze. But even his mouth was stuffed with something, so he could not make a sound. Lu Chen walked over, and Old Ma hurriedly closed the door of the quiet room behind him. Then he frowned and looked at Chen He, and said with some doubt, "Didn't he agree to cooperate with you? Why do you still look like you have a blood feud?" Lu Chen squatted down in front of Chen He, looked at him with a smile, and said, "Probably, except for you, everyone in the world knows that you have turned to me and my master, Lord Tianlan." After a pause, he deliberately added, "Of course, this also includes your devil cult companions." Chen He's body twisted and wriggled, looking like he was about to go mad with anger. Old Ma saw this and was suddenly shocked, and said, "I say, could it be you? I was talking nonsense to the outside." Lu Chen admitted what he had done in an unusually straightforward manner, and said, "Otherwise, why would I be in such a hurry to move him from the prison to here? But Chen He, don't blame me, I am actually saving your life. Otherwise, now that the outside world is talking about you betraying your master for glory, who knows when you will suddenly die in that prison." Old Ma looked at him with some disbelief. Fuyunji prison had been famous for many years, but such a thing had never happened before. Lu Chen pretended not to see, and seemed to have no intention of interrogating Chen He. He only said indifferently, "How is it, have you thought it through? You are also a smart person. The current situation is that I have splashed dirty water on you, and I will continue to do so in the future, more and more, until your whole body is dirty and wet, and no one in the devil cult will believe you anymore. You can't go back." Lu Chen said to him, "We have all stayed in the devil cult for more than 10 years, and know how those people treat traitors, and with this matter, even if you have a whole body full of mouths, you can't clear your name. No matter what, the people in the devil cult will not open their hearts to a suspected traitor, right? You see, you have no way out." Chen He made a weak but shrill hissing sound, his eyes were red, as if he was about to go crazy. Lu Chen did not care about this, and said calmly, "You see, compared to other people who only know how to use brute force to interrogate, I am the one who truly knows what is the most important in the heart of a believer of the saint cult. Those people that you are not afraid of death to protect, actually hate you to the core, and want to grind your bones and scatter your ashes, if you still have a family. And, do you?" Lu Chen looked down at him, and said calmly, "If you do, what will happen to them, we all know in our hearts, right?" He reached over and gently removed the cloth from Chen He's mouth. Chen He stared at Lu Chen, and after a while, he hissed in a low voice, "Shameless." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows, squinted his eyes, looked at him for a while, and said, "So, you really do have a family." Chapter 496. Although they had been captured and beaten by the world's righteous sects led by Zheng Xiameng for hundreds of years, accused of being evil and propagandized for many years, in the hearts of the people, they were extremely vicious and even evil like ghosts. But the people of the evil sect were after all still human. Of course they would have family and relatives. This logic couldn't be more simple. If only those who had no father or mother, lonely and destitute, could enter the evil sect, then this sect would have been completely annihilated hundreds of years ago. Back then, when Lu Chen was lurking in the devil cult as a shadow, among the core figures of the devil cult around him, there were many family and friends. For example, Master Elder Yun, who was closest to him, had a son and a daughter, and they had a very good relationship with Lu Qin. The elder brother, Yun Jian, was a good friend of Lu Qin, and the younger sister, Yun Shaoqing, grew up with Lu Qin. They had developed feelings for each other, and in the future, Elder Yun had even thought of matchmaking them. Unfortunately, in the far-reaching battle of the Barren Valley, not only did the world's righteous and demonic sects completely change, but even the fate of the insignificant individuals, everyone, came to an abrupt end on that night, and then embarked on a different path. When Lu Qin woke up from the pain of being burned by the black fire, Yun Jian and Yun Shaoqing had already died in that battle. In the chaos, even their corpses could not be found, and from then on, everyone was separated from each other. "Hey!" A voice suddenly sounded in his ear, and at the same time, someone pushed his shoulder. Lu Qin was shocked and turned to look, only to see old Ma frowning at him, a puzzled look on his face, and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Lu Qin was silent for a moment, then shook his head and said, "Nothing." Throwing the past memories from his mind, Lu Qin took a deep breath. The past was over, there was no medicine for regret in this world. "Do you know why I brought you here from the dungeon?" Lu Qin looked at Chen He and said, "That prison was full of people from the devil cult. If I didn't take precautions, I was really afraid that you would die inexplicably at any time." Chen He stared at him angrily, but had no intention of refuting his words. Lu Qin said calmly, "We are all smart people, it's better to lay things out. Your performance in the devil cult is much better than the real fanatics I saw back then. You shouldn't be someone who is willing to give up everything for those illusory gods. Then, what's left is nothing more than seeking fame and fortune, as well as the well-being of your family." Lu Qin smiled, looked at him, and said, "But you have nothing now. You're locked up here and tortured day and night. You can't even beg for death. What benefits do you have?" So, it was for the sake of a loyal reputation that would be immortalized for generations to come. But look, it's all gone now. The reputation that you valued has been smeared by me. Also, how do the people in the devil cult treat traitors? Let me think about it. I'll definitely be hunted to death. You see, I hid for more than 10 years back then. In addition, if you have a family, of course, you will vent your anger. You are an old man, don't tell me you don't know these things. Chen He's face slowly contorted. He clenched his teeth and stared at Lu Qin with his eyes wide open. A thin trail of blood slowly flowed from the corner of his mouth, as if he had bitten through his lips. Old Ma frowned at the side. He seemed to be a little uncomfortable with Lu Qin's tone of voice. However, Lu Qin did not seem to have any intention of letting Chen He off. As if he was talking about something that could not be more normal, he said, "If I remember correctly, in the devil cult, when dealing with the family members of traitors, the higher the position, the more ruthless they are. Even the elderly and children are not spared. Exterminating the whole family is also common. If there are some lunatics among those who go, then those family members will suffer even more, especially some women and children." He gently exhaled, looked at Chen He and said, "You know, I am not threatening you, I am speaking the truth." Chen He was silent, the muscles on his face contorted. After a while, he suddenly said in a hoarse voice, "Your actions, what's the difference between you and the evil people of the devil cult? No, you're even more vicious than us." Lu Qin raised his head, his expression a little strange. But after a while, he was heard saying, "I'm different from you." But what exactly was different, he did not say. "Rely on me." Lu Qin said to Chen He, "You are now at the end of the road, there's no way out. Even if you'd rather die than submit, after you die, you won't get the reputation you want, instead, you'll harm your friends and family. Why bother? Look at me, I have the most powerful Zhengxianmeng in the world, the most powerful demigod, and I'm his only disciple. If you rely on me, you'll be able to walk under the sun, all kinds of benefits, reputation, resources, you'll have it all. Everything that the devil cult can't give you, I'll give it to you easily. Not to mention, you can also save your friends and family from disaster." Lu Chen's tone from the beginning to the end was gentle and calm, his words patient and pleasant to listen to. It looked like he always convinced people with reason. But for some reason, the other two people in the room, when they looked at Lu Chen, felt a faint chill in their hearts. It gave people the feeling that they were looking at a gentle but terrifying devil, slowly dragging people into hell with a smile. How is it? Lu Chen said to Chen He, I've placed all the results of this matter in front of you. If you still don't wake up, then you can go to hell. Chen He's expression changed, he gritted his teeth, and after a while, he shouted hoarsely, why should I believe you? Old Ma, who was standing at the side, sighed in his heart and looked away. He knew that this tough man, who had once withstood torture, could not hold on at this moment. Lu Chen smiled, then reached out to untie the rope on Chen He's body, at the same time said gently, it's okay, you can discuss these things with me, just tell me what I need to do to make you believe me. When Lu Chen and Old Ma came out of the room and walked to the door of the Kunlun Hall, they found that it was almost dark. They had actually stayed there for a whole day. Looking at the beautiful sunset in the distance, Lu Chen was in a daze, while Old Ma sighed and said, congratulations. Lu Chen said lightly, what's there to congratulate? It's just a rope and a person who has no way to go. Old Ma smiled, thinking that if this matter was really so simple, there were not many people in the world who could do it. Old Ma. Lu Chen suddenly called him. What's wrong? Old Ma said. Lu Chen said, after a long time, I sometimes feel a little scared. Some people and things in the past, I thought I could remember them forever, but now, in a flash of 10 years, I find that I seem to have begun to forget. Old Ma's heart moved, and he said, what have you forgotten? Who and what things? Lu Chen shook his head, his face a little blank. After a moment, he said, you go back first, I'll wait here for my master to come back, it's time to discuss the last thing with him. Chapter 497. In the dark and humid night, a cold wind blew past. Unbeknownst to him, it started to rain again. The rain hit the eaves and flowed down, gradually forming a transparent wall of water hanging on the eaves. The water droplets floated down in the dark and dripped on the ground, making a low and sweet sound. Sister Sue. In the originally dark and quiet room, there was suddenly a call. With some caution, it floated over from the bed. It was White Lotus's voice. On another bed not far from the other side of the room, Su Qingjun turned over and responded. Then, she seemed a little surprised and said, this is the first time you called me that, right? Is it? White Lotus thought for a moment and seemed a little embarrassed. We weren't familiar before, but now that you saved my life and are older than me, I still have to call you sister. Su Qingjun smiled in the dark and said, although I helped to treat your wounds, the person who really saved you was actually Lu Chen. I can't take this credit. White Lotus snorted and said, he stabbed me first. If I still have to be grateful to him, then I can't do it. Su Qingjun smiled and said, that makes sense. After a pause, Su Qingjun looked at where White Lotus was and said, White Lotus, when I heard you talking to Lu Chen a few days ago, I had a question that had been puzzling me. You didn't seem to be controlled by him at that time. Why didn't you dodge at that critical moment? If the injury had been more serious, you would have lost your life. White Lotus suddenly became silent. After a while, she said in a low voice, I wasn't controlled by him, but I was still controlled by others. Her words were very vague and soft towards the end. Su Qingjun didn't hear it clearly and asked in surprise, what? White Lotus didn't seem to want to talk about this topic anymore. She turned to look at the window not far away and looked at the shadow swaying in the darkness. She heard the pleasant sound of rain outside. She seemed to be startled and then said faintly, it's raining again. Su Qingjun looked at her and heard White Lotus's voice floating over like the wind outside. She said, I wonder if it's raining on Kunlun Mountain now? Su Qingjun was startled and then slowly sat up. She said softly, what's wrong? Do you miss home? White Lotus shook her head in the darkness and said sadly, I don't miss home. I just miss the things on Kunlun Mountain. Sister Sue, you've been out for so long. do you miss home? Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she said, of course I still miss home. After all, my parents are still there, but I heard that they seem to have some resentment towards you. White Lotus said, when I was still on Kunlun Mountain, I had already heard such rumors. Su Qingjun was lost in thought. Then she smiled bitterly and said, they are my parents. I didn't completely live up to their expectations. But that place is still my home. You're so good. No matter what, you still have a home that you miss, unlike me. White Lotus suddenly sneered. After a pause, she said, my master who died probably practiced that kind of ice and snow martial technique. He practiced it too deeply, and as a result, his temperament became as cold as ice. So I don't feel that he was passionate towards me. But like what you said, we were still master and disciple. Although he died inexplicably, he also caused me a lot of trouble. Su Qingjun was shocked and said, are you saying that Hakushin Jinkuan, he, harmed you? I was a person who hid under a big tree. I planned to enjoy the shade, but suddenly the tree fell. Of course I was embarrassed. White Lotus said snappily, on the contrary, look at Lu Chen. He's so glorious now. Not to mention me, even you, compared to when we were in Kunlun Mountain, it's like heaven and earth. Although she knew that this kind of thing wasn't a happy thing, but when Su Qingjun heard White Lotus's words for the first time, she couldn't help but laugh in her heart. After a while, she stood up and walked to White Lotus's bedside and sat down. White Lotus turned her head to look at her in the darkness. Even in the darkness, Su Qingjun seemed to be able to see the girl's unusually bright eyes. Don't hate Lu Chen too much in your heart. Su Qingjun said softly. Why? White Lotus asked. Su Qingjun sighed and said, in the past so many years, he has been a dangerous shadow who licks blood from the tip of a knife. I don't know how many lives he has taken. In other words, I don't know how high his cultivation is now, but his means of killing are definitely not bad. She turned her head and stared into White Lotus's eyes, saying in a low voice, think about it. If he really wanted to kill you that night, would that knife have missed? White Lotus was silent. After a while, she suddenly turned over and faced the wall, looking like she was about to fall asleep. In front of the main hall of Kunlun, perfected Lord Tianlan had already dismissed the guards who guarded the Kunlun hall. Then, he and Lu Chen, master and disciple, sat on the ground at the entrance of the main hall casually, with their backs against the tall doors behind them. Facing the rain that kept dripping from the eaves, they chatted and drank casually, as if this was a casual and carefree life. Except for the sound of the wind and rain, there was no other sound. It seemed that only the two of them were left in such a huge hall. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at the boundless dark sky in the distance and did not speak for a long time. That was until Lu Chen's voice rang in his ears as though he wanted to confirm it with him. So, it's decided then? Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, let's do it. Okay. Lu Chen also looked at the dark night outside. After a while, he suddenly said, you know, I once called you a lunatic in front of old Ma. Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned, as if he did not expect Lu Chen to suddenly say such a thing. At that moment, he only smiled and did not say anything, obviously not taking Lu Chen's words to heart. However, there was no smile on Lu Chen's face. It seemed that he was not just bickering with perfected Lord Tianlan. He said in a low voice, back then, I scolded you to vent my anger. In fact, I didn't really mean that. However, is what you want to do now really okay? Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, it's okay. If you believe me, help me. If you don't believe me, you can also leave the immortal city. No one will stop you. After a moment of silence, Lu Chen said, actually, I'm also a lunatic. To think that I chose to believe you. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed out loud and threw a wine gourd over. Lu Chen caught it and raised his head to take a big gulp. Then, he let out a long breath and sighed. Awesome. As he said that, he turned to Perfected Lord Tianlan and asked in a deep voice, "How much time do we have?" Perfected Lord Tianlan hesitated for a moment and said, "I can't be sure. It depends on the situation of the blood moon." Lu Chen nodded as if expressing his understanding. Then, he turned around and looked at the water droplets that were dripping down from the top of the hall like a waterfall. After a while, he suddenly said to Perfected Lord Tianlan, "Speaking of which, I've been feeling a little puzzled about something recently." "What is it?" Lu Chen said, "It's about you, Master. For so many years, you've always treated the fiend cult as your #1 target. You've been involved in so many battles and killings, wanting to get rid of them as soon as possible. However, the strange thing is that you don't seem to care about it, even though I've brought news that we might be able to capture Elder Gui this time. Isn't that a very strange thing?" Lu Chen turned around and stared at Perfected Lord Tianlan, saying softly, "Isn't that so, Master?" Chapter 498. There's nothing to be concerned about. He's just a stray dog who's old and feeble. Apart from barking a few times, he can't do much in the current situation. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression did not change as he said indifferently, "If we can catch him, we'll eliminate him. If we can't, he won't be able to do much anyway. Why should we care about him?" Lu Chen did not say anything else. He just turned his head silently and looked at the boundless night outside. Then, he raised his head and drank. Although Perfected Lord Tianlan's words to Lu Chen were very calm and relaxed, he was the boss. He could say whatever he wanted. If his subordinates also had the same attitude, then there must be something wrong with their brains. Of course, Lu Chen's brain was not damaged. Therefore, he very wisely pretended that he had not heard Perfected Lord Tianlan's words. He did not neglect any of the arrangements and preparations that should be made. He had been forced into a dead end. In the end, he still lowered his head in the face of reality. He was originally a person who was not even afraid of death. In the end, he found that he could not bear to die with a stain on his name. Not to mention that his family might even be tortured and killed by his fellows from the devil cult whom he had risked his life to protect. Since that was the case, what was the point of persevering and dying? Therefore, it was better to change his way of living. At this point in life, there was no turning back. There was only one path in front of him. Just thinking about it made him feel a little sad. Since there was such a gap in his mind, the remaining desires quickly broke through all his defenses like floodwaters. His past perseverance seemed to be worthless at this moment. However, before he completely defected, he only had one last insistence and request for Lu Chen. He wanted to see his family. Lu Chen agreed. Of course, this matter could not be separated from the all-powerful Fuyunji. Lu Chen directly found Shuang. These two were now the most powerful nobles under Perfected Lord Tianlan. Regardless of whether their previous relationship was a little delicate, after Lu Chen explained the situation to her, Shuang immediately agreed and began to act without hesitation. He's family was not settled in the most flourishing immortal city in the world. Even though there were many people here and it was as vast as the ocean, the True Immortal Alliance and the Floating Clouds Agency, which had a deep foundation, might really be searching for a needle in a haystack in this huge city. Therefore, He's family was settled in a small city 300 miles north of the immortal city. When He made this request to Lu Chen, it was during the day. That night, a group of Fuyunji elites arrived at the small city called Hohut. This group was personally appointed by Shuang, but the leadership was given to Lu Chen. No matter how you looked at it, this seemed to be a tactful expression of goodwill from Shuang. Moreover, other than the 10 Fuyunji people, there were 3 more people in the group. They were all experts that the Kunlun party had recently dispatched. It could be seen that Shuang seemed to be slowly integrating these new forces. However, he did not know if it was a coincidence, but among these 3 people, Lu Chen knew 2 of them. One was Su Qingjun, the other was He Yi, and the last person was a complete stranger to him. Her name was Kai Jingyi, and she was also a Kunlun party expert who had cultivated to the Jin Dan realm. Including Lu Chen, this group had a total of 14 people, but only Lu Chen knew the final destination. In reality, even in Fuyunji, there might be a few people who knew about tonight's operation, but the only one who knew the final goal was Shuang. Lu Chen led the group along the way. Although he did not say the final goal, everyone understood that this was an extremely important matter, so no one asked too many questions. However, on the way, Lu Chen's gaze would occasionally sweep over the two people he was familiar with. Su Qingjuan's expression was calm, as if there was no emotion on her face. Occasionally, when her gaze met Lu Chen's, she would also nod slightly in acknowledgement. In comparison, He Yi's attitude was very complicated and ambiguous. Basically, he also kept a cold face throughout the journey, but when Lu Chen saw him, his reaction was very different from before. At first, he ignored him, cold and indifferent, but later on, who knew what he thought of along the way, his attitude gradually softened, and in the end, he even took the initiative to smile at Lu Chen. Even with Lu Chen's rich experience, in front of this he still could not guess what this person was thinking. After rushing all the way, they finally reached the outskirts of Hohhot City at night. Only then did the group know that this was the destination of their trip. For the first time, Lu Chen told everyone the goal of this trip, which was to find and rescue Chen Yi's family, and then return to the immortal city of Fuyunji. Recently, many people in Zhengxianmeng had heard about the legend of the stubborn Chen Yi. Although no one had really come out to confirm it, and it seemed to be an unfounded rumor, but today, after hearing this news, everyone knew that Chen Yi had actually been instigated by this new disciple of perfected Lord Tianlan. The attitudes of the 10 people in Fuyunji immediately changed. Although because of the subtle difference in their positions, everyone maintained a certain distance, but these people who were selected by Shuang were of course the elites of Fuyunji, and were also people who had fought against the devil cult for many years. Of course, they understood how important it was to be able to instigate such a high-level person to defect. Therefore, when everyone looked at Lu Chen again, there was a hint of admiration in their eyes. They no longer thought of Lu Chen as an insignificant person who relied on perfected Lord Tianlan to advance. Among the 3 from the Kunlun party, Kai Jingyi probably did not know much about the devil cult, so her reaction was normal. Su Qingjun, on the other hand, was calm on the surface, her eyes bright, as if she was in a good mood. And He Yi, on the other hand, had a complicated expression. He stared at Lu Chen from the side, and did not speak for a long time. In short, under everyone's different reactions, Lu Chen made the final arrangements, and then led the group straight to the northwest corner of the city, where Chen Yi's family lived. For cultivators, this distance would only take them a short while to cover. The night was silent, and there was no one on the long street. In front of them was a very ordinary-looking house. The door was tightly shut. In the dead of the night, the faint cold wind blew at the corner of Lu Chen's clothes. After that, a wave of strange sounds that seemed to be repressed, angry, fearful, and despairing could be heard intermittently. It was low and deep as it drifted through the darkness of the house. If it wasn't for the extraordinary hearing of a cultivator, it would really be difficult to hear it. Lu Chen stood in front of the door. Just as he was about to push it open, he suddenly raised his head and looked at the top right corner of the wooden door. To his surprise, he saw that in the dark corner, there was a bloody handprint. His face suddenly darkened, and his gaze turned cold. Chapter 499. Lu Chen silently pondered for a moment, retreated back from the door and then directly summoned the 10 Fuyunji men over, quietly instructed a few words, at the same time pointed to the bloody handprint on the main door. The members of the Floating Clouds division turned their heads to look. However, they did not reveal any surprised expressions. At most, a few of them frowned slightly before nodding their heads in agreement. Following which, the 10 Fuyunji men silently dispersed, started to sweep towards the 4 corners of the house. Looking at their direction, most likely very soon they would be able to surround the house tightly, almost not leaving any gaps. This was a very strange feeling. It looked like there were only 10 of them, but it felt like there were hundreds and thousands of them. Those who were not sent out by Lu Chen were the 3 Kunlun party men. Right now they were still standing behind Lu Chen. Towards Lu Chen's decision, the Fuyunji people did not express any objections. Among the three Kunlun people, Su Qingjun and He did not speak, instead that Kai Jingyi quietly spoke, indicating that he could also help. Lu Chen very simply replied to his question, indicated that this kind of encirclement and interception looked simple but was actually not easy. The Fuyunji people were all experienced, tonight they would be the first to do it. As for the remaining 4 people including himself, of course they would not just stand there and watch, just based on their skills. The 4 of them were actually the strongest, therefore directly breaking the door, this kind of crude and simple but at the same time dangerous matter, was left to them. Hearing his words, Kai Jingyi also quietened down. It could be seen that although his skills were not bad but tonight was the first time against the evil sect, he was somewhat excited and also somewhat nervous. Instead the other 2 youths, Su Qingjun and He were very calm. Lu Chen glanced at them, his eyes revealing an inquiring look. Very quickly, Su Qingjun and He both nodded to indicate that they had no objections and were already prepared. Lu Chen glanced afar again, saw that after a while, the 10 Fuyunji elite soldiers had already concealed themselves in the darkness around the house, completed the encirclement. Lu Chen nodded and then again walked towards the house's main door, glanced at the bloody handprint, stretched his hand and pressed on the door. The wooden door must have had some years, it was no longer that smooth and flat, a little roughness could be felt. Lu Chen's hand pressed on the middle of the door, his face calm but deep in his eyes, a dark flame suddenly flashed past. The 3 people behind Lu Chen all glanced at him. Although they could not completely see Lu Chen's cultivation method, the hidden power was still very strong. It was enough for them, Golden Elixir Realm cultivators, to see it. A low and light sound was heard, the door bolt behind the door seemed to have broken, separated by a thick door and then fell to the ground. Lu Chen's hand slightly exerted force, the door creaked open. Lu Chen turned and nodded to the 3 behind and then stepped in. Su Qingjun and the rest followed. At this moment it was really late at night, everything was quiet. In the cold and cheerless night, there was not the slightest movement apart from the faintly discernible groan of pain. However, in the next moment, Lu Chen, who looked abnormally calm, suddenly rushed forward. His speed was so fast that there was even a sharp whistle on the spot, startling the 3 behind him. They only saw him rushing through the entrance, not taking the main path of the courtyard, but directly pouncing on a big tree in the corner of the courtyard. A moment later, an angry roar came from the tree, but Lu Chen's figure instantly disappeared into the shadow of the tree, followed by a shrill scream that echoed through the night. At the same time, there was a commotion in the depths of the mansion, and several voices shouted angrily. Lu Chen floated back to the ground, and without even looking back, he waved his hand and rushed into the mansion with the other 3 people. The moment he waved his hand, one of his palms was already full of blood, and when he rushed forward, behind them, a person fell down from the big tree, heavily hit the ground, his body twisted and convulsed, blood flowed out from his body, it looked like he would not survive. Amidst the hubbub, Lu Chen and the rest rushed straight into the backyard and immediately smelled a strong stench of blood. Corpses started to appear on the ground and at the same time, someone cried out in alarm and anger. The evil faction demons rushed out from a few houses and started to fight with them. Su Qingjun and the rest went up to meet them. This confrontation, the difference in strength between the 2 sides was very directly displayed. Although Lu Chen's side had fewer people but each of them were valiant, placed in a famous sect like the Kunlun party, Su Qingjun and the rest were also the best in the Jin Dan realm. Other than Yuanyingzhenren, they were almost invincible. Now that the evil faction had been in decline for many years, where would they still have so many masters? This confrontation, a round of killing, immediately they retreated. In a blink of an eye, a few of them fell. Seeing that the situation was not good, the incoming enemy was too strong, immediately there were people from the evil faction who shouted and fled. As a result, a few figures flew up the wall beside, and all of them scattered at the same time, each escaping in different directions, seemed to be very experienced. Su Qingjun just wanted to chase but was held back by Lu Chen, then heard Lu Chen said in a deep voice, "Don't care about those who escaped, it's more important to split up and save people first." Su Qingjun nodded and agreed. The 4 of them scattered and ran towards different houses. And in the distance, those evil men who had just rushed up the wall and were about to escape, at this moment, cries of alarm were heard. From the dark shadows, sinister and vicious weapons were flashing, crafty hidden weapons were flying out, and there were also all kinds of tricks. For a moment, not knowing how many unlucky people were hit, like dumplings, fell down from the wall. Quite a number of them were extremely angry and cursed out loud. Naturally, no one cared about those evil faction remnants despair outside. In the house, Su Qingjun carried her long sword and searched all the way. She saw that there was no one in the two houses, but on the way, there were 1 or 2 corpses lying on the ground. Looking at the clothes, they seemed to be servant girls, and the state of their death was rather miserable. Her expression was not good. Suddenly she saw a glimmer of light flashed in a house ahead and immediately extinguished. Something strange seemed to be happening. Her expression changed, quietly leaned over, quietly waited at the door for a moment. Suddenly her body knocked open the door and directly rushed in. Immediately, a loud cry was heard from inside the house, mixed with a woman's cry of alarm. 2 black figures in the darkness pounced toward Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun turned, waved her long sword. A ray of moonlight suddenly lit up in the darkness, illuminating her cold, beautiful face, broke through the shadows and slashed down. The sound of the wind stopped. Everything seemed to stop at that moment. Moonlight slash. This was the Kunlun party's famous unique skill. Naturally, its power was extremely great. In a single exchange, a miserable cry was heard. One of the black figures flew out directly, while the other black figure stood stiffly on the spot, not moving for a moment. Then blood appeared. A moment later, a hoarse cry was heard, directly fell to the ground, blood gushing out. Only Su Qingjun's face did not show any joy, but suddenly a trace of anger flashed past. Right now, with that flash of light, she could see the situation in the house clearly. The 2 people who pounced were naturally the evil faction's demons, and almost half of their bodies were naked. There was a huge wound on the chest of the man who was killed by her just now. It seemed that he was dead, but the other man took a few steps back and suddenly grabbed a nearly naked woman. He placed the blade on her white neck and said in a hoarse voice, "Stop, or I'll kill her." After saying that, he exerted force. Immediately a stream of blood flowed down from that woman's neck. Chapter 500. There was only a glimmer of light in the dimly lit room, but one could vaguely see that the woman's appearance was rather beautiful. Probably because of this, she was humiliated, but at the moment she was struggling at death's door. It seemed that she was still not out of danger and could die at any time in the hands of this exasperated and desperate evil cult heretic. Su Qingjun blocked the way out of the door but did not step forward. Facing this situation, she was somewhat at a loss. When the evil cult heretic saw that Su Qingjun had no intention of giving way, he became even more anxious and angry. He stretched out his hand and the knife made a cut on the woman's body. Immediately, a wound appeared on her smooth shoulder and blood gushed out. The woman immediately screamed. Following that, the evil cult heretic roared, "Get lost, this slut is Chinhe's wife. If you don't move, just wait to collect her corpse." Chinhe's wife? Su Qingjun was shocked and could not help but take another look at the woman. Her heart suddenly hesitated. This group of people had hurriedly marched from afar and rushed here overnight. Wasn't it to bring Chinhe's family back? If there were any accidents and the people they brought back turned into corpses, then Lu Chen's plan would all be in vain. The long sword in Su Qingjun's hand slowly drooped down. Although her face was filled with disgust, her body still subconsciously started to slowly retreat. The evil cult heretic saw this and was overjoyed. He laughed wildly and grabbed the woman and ran out. He did not care that the woman's clothes were tattered and she was in an extremely sorry state. However, when they were near the door, the woman suddenly cried and struggled, as if no matter what, she did not want to walk out of the room. The evil cult heretic was furious and waved his hand. "Pa pa." 2 slaps, causing the woman to cry bitterly. Su Qingjun was so angry that her face turned white. She raised the long sword in her hand and was about to stab. However, at this moment, the evil cult heretic was extremely vigilant. He turned and grabbed the woman's throat, glaring at her and said, "If you want her to die, then come over." Su Qingjun could only forcefully stop her body. The anger and grievance in her heart almost overflowed. Her pair of bright eyes stared fixedly at the vicious thief. That devil cult sorcerer seemed to have noticed Su Qingjuan's current state of hesitation and became more and more savage. Facing Su Qingjuan's murderous gaze, not only was he not afraid, but he even looked at Su Qingjun with a lascivious gaze. Then, he licked his lips and said, "Little girl, you're lucky today. I'll remember you." As he spoke, he let out a maniacal laugh. As for the unspoken meaning in his words, no one could think about it. Just that Su Qingjun was an intelligent girl. This time, her chest almost exploded with anger. At the same time, her cheeks were crimson red and her face was filled with murderous intent. She could not wait to immediately rush up and dismember this person's body, but in the end, she could only stand there powerlessly. That evil cult heretic sneered and dragged the woman out of the door. Just as he was about to escape, suddenly, at this moment, in the darkness outside the door, in the corner beside the door, a black dagger that almost completely blended in with the surrounding darkness silently pierced out from the darkness. It went straight into the chest from the back, piercing through the heart. That evil cult heretic's body shook greatly, his entire body suddenly stiffened. A moment later, a shadow flashed out from the darkness. It was the expressionless Lu Chen. He stretched out his hand and pushed. Immediately, that evil cult heretic together with the woman fell back into that house. That woman screamed and rolled on the ground twice. Suddenly, she realized that she had left that scoundrel's control and immediately crawled forward with all her might. Su Qingjun, who was at the side, rushed up and first stood in between the woman and the evil cult heretic. Then, she slashed her sword towards that person. The moonlight suddenly appeared, lighting up a cold halo. Following that, blood blossomed. That evil cult heretic's entire body was sent flying by this sword. In mid-air, one could see that his flesh and blood were already badly mutilated. It could be seen how powerful Su Qingjuan's sword was. With a bang sound, that mutilated body hit the wall at the side and then rolled down. At the same time, Lu Chen, who was at the door, had just walked in. Su Qingjun hatefully looked at that evil cult heretic who could not be more dead. Then, she heaved a sigh of relief and turned to look at Lu Chen. If it wasn't for Lu Chen's sudden appearance and ambush outside the door, she most likely would not have been able to do anything to this person. So, Su Qingjun revealed a rare smile. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly saw that Lu Chen had just walked into the house and immediately turned his back. His first action was to directly close the door. The room suddenly became a few degrees darker. Su Qingjun was still in shock. Lu Chen instead maintained a posture of facing the door with his back facing them. He opened his mouth and said, "Lady, please wait." Su Qingjun was startled, and then she was horrified. She quickly turned around and saw that the woman was hiding beside the bed, holding a pair of scissors that she'd taken out of nowhere. The scissors were aimed at her throat, and it seemed as if she was about to stab it in. "Don't be like this," Su Qingjun cried out. That woman's face was filled with despair and pain. Tears flowed down her face and she said with a trembling voice, I don't want to live anymore. But there are still my 2 children in the cellar in the backyard. I beg you to save them. Send them to their father's side. Even if Lady Chen. Suddenly, Lu Chen, who had been standing motionlessly by the door with his back facing them, suddenly opened his mouth and directly interrupted her mournful words. He said in a deep voice, "Please listen to me. I am Lu Chen. This lady is called Su Qingjun. Both of us are disciples of the Kunlun party. We came here today to rescue you and meet Chen He." Speaking until here, he paused for a moment and then said in a calm tone, "Tonight, we passed by this house and found 2 evil cult demons. We killed them. Then we found Lady hiding in the neighboring room and went to the cellar together to rescue the children. This is what happened." The 2 women in the room were silent for a moment. Their faces showed surprise. Lu Chen then turned to look at Su Qingjun and said, "Qingjun, is it like this?" Su Qingjun took a deep breath and nodded heavily. Then she looked at the woman with sympathy and said, "That's right. If others ask, I will also say the same. And I will never mention what happened tonight again. The woman was stunned at first. Then her body trembled and her breathing became rapid. Tears kept flowing. Gradually, the scissors in her hand slowly drooped down. Su Qingjun breathed a sigh of relief and looked at her with some relief. Suddenly, she heard Lu Chen's voice again. Qingjun, help find a new set of clothes for the woman to change into. Su Qingjun suddenly came to her senses and quickly walked over to support the woman. The woman grabbed her hand and nodded again and again. It seemed that she didn't know what to say, but also seemed to be a bit frightened and doubtful. Su Qingjun comforted her in a low voice and then let her find another set of clothes in the room to change into. In this dark night, she and Lu Chen were willing and trying hard to cover up such a secret. But at this time, suddenly, there was a burst of footsteps in the corridor outside the door. A moment later, a voice sounded. It was He. He stopped in front of the door and knocked on it, saying, Lu Chen, junior sister Su, I think I heard some commotion over here. Did something happen? The room was silent for a moment. The woman's face suddenly revealed a nervous and frightened expression. Su Qingjun looked back and found that Lu Chen's brows were wrinkled. His eyes were staring deeply, as if he wasn't looking at the wooden door, but the figure standing in the darkness outside the door. Chapter 501. Su Qingjun was also anxious, looked at Lu Chen and was about to speak when Lu Chen's clear voice said, He Xixiang, there are 2 evil faction heretics hiding in the house, Shiji Su, and I discovered them, and after a fierce battle, we have eliminated them. He Yi's figure was faintly reflected in the window. After hearing Lu Chen's words, he still stood outside and did not move. After a while he said, I see, do you need me to come in and help? That woman used her hand to cover her chest, her face was full of pleading and she shook her head desperately. Su Qingjun walked over and blocked in front of her, gently patted her body to comfort her. At the same time, her eyes glanced at Lu Chen. Lu Chen seemed to feel her eyes behind him, nodded slightly and very calmly said to the door, Thank you He Xixiang, everything is fine here, Shiji Su and I will search again, we will come out later, we don't need to trouble you. He Yi stood outside and was silent for a while, then said, That's good. After speaking, he walked forward and disappeared outside the window. It was quiet in the house. Outside the house, the sound of footsteps gradually fading away, mixed with some intense fighting and cursing sounds from further away. It should be the fight between those fleeing evil sect demons who were intercepted by the Fuyan Division's men. But to the 3 people here, it seemed to be very far away right now. When the footsteps finally disappeared, that woman's expression relaxed, but she staggered and almost fell to the ground. Su Qingjun quickly hugged her, softly comforted her and then turned to speak to Lu Chen, but Lu Chen suddenly turned his head, put his hand on his mouth and made a keep quiet gesture. Su Qingjun was startled. Lu Chen slowly walked over. At the same time he said in a clear voice, Shiji Su, these 2 evil faction heretics' bodies, how do you think we should deal with them? Su Qingjun was intelligent, her eyes looked outside the door and had already understood. After a moment, she carried that woman and walked inside, calmly said, You do as you see fit, I will look around again. While they were talking, their hands did not stop. Lu Chen dragged the 2 dead evil faction heretics together. Su Qingjun covered the woman and let her change into the clothes she had just taken out. After the woman changed her clothes, Lu Chen nodded to the 2 of them and walked over to open the door. He then dragged the 2 corpses out and threw them into the courtyard. At the same time, his eyes calmly looked around, saw that the huge house was in a mess. There were shadows moving everywhere, but overall, it seemed that their side had the upper hand. Those evil faction heretics who bullied women, children, old and young might be extremely vicious, but if they really met the elite good faction masters, with the evil faction's current weakness, they were basically powerless to resist. In a shadowy corner far away, He looked at Lu Chen for a while and then looked at the 2 corpses that he had thrown into the courtyard. After a moment of silence, expressionlessly retreated and soon disappeared into the darkness. And Lu Chen, who was at the door, waited for a while, seemed to sense something, then made a gesture to the house behind him. Su Qingjun then led that woman out. Lu Chen very directly said, "Lead us to save your child." That woman nodded heavily and quickly led them to the backyard. In the dark night, her clothes fluttered, plain and peaceful, covering her injuries and also covering the ugly truth not long ago. This night quickly quietened down, the night deepened and the chaos in the house also calmed down. This time the evil faction sent as many as 18 people. Obviously they had the intention of exterminating the entire family, not letting a single Chen family member escape. But in the end, 9 died and 9 were injured. It could be said that they were completely wiped out. The Chen family side also suffered a lot of casualties. The maids and servants died the most. 3 or 4 of their relatives and friends also died. But the most important thing was, Chen He's wife and 2 children were spared from the calamity. This was because when the calamity suddenly happened, after those evil people rushed in during the night, Chen Fern immediately hid the children in an extremely secluded cellar and instructed them not to make any noise or come out. The cellar had been built long ago. It was exceptionally secluded, even a cultivator would find it hard to discover. But because of this, the underground space was very narrow, only enough to accommodate 1 person, barely able to fit 2 children. Lady Chen herself could not go any further. This kind of secluded and narrow cellar was almost useless on normal days, but Chen He secretly built such a place in his own house, probably to guard against something. Lady Chen was humiliated but managed to escape with her life in the end. Her luck was naturally good. But it was also because those 2 evil faction sorcerers forced her to reveal the whereabouts of the Chen family's 2 children while they were being tortured. Naturally Lady Chen would rather die than reveal the truth and persevered until Lu Chen and the rest arrived. After that, there was no need to stay in this small city for long. Everything could not be compared to the immortal city where Xianxiameng's main hall was located, so after a few leaders discussed, Lu Chen very quickly made a decision. Everyone rushed back to the immortal city overnight. The journey was long, and many of the Chen clan members were mortals without any cultivation. Fortunately, the people of the Fuyun agency were very resourceful, and they actually managed to get a few carriages to send them on. Then, everyone left the small city together. In the middle of the night, where did they get these horse carriages and horses? Because of these horse carriages, the speed of returning was much slower than when they came, but no matter what, this time at least they had more or less completed their mission, so everyone was still relatively relaxed and happy. Lu Chen walked at the back of the group, probably to cover the back. As he walked, he found that Su Qingjun had unknowingly come to his side, walking with him. He smiled at her. She was silent, as if she did not want to smile, but in the end she still slightly pursed her lips, then softly said, "These evil faction villains really do all kinds of evil, they deserve to die." Lu Chen nodded, said, "So, if you meet them in the future, don't be lenient." Su Qingjun made a sound, after a moment of silence, said, "That Lady Chen's matter, you handled it very well." After a pause, she said, "Much better than what I wanted to do at that time, this is indeed the best. Just that I don't understand, why did you think of doing this at that time?" Lu Chen was silent for a while, said, "I have seen women who had this kind of experience. Once the news of their humiliation spread, very few of them could survive." After a moment, he added, "Most of them died by suicide. What killed was not only knives, axes and weapons, but also the tongue and words." Su Qingjun was silent. For a moment she did not know what to say. Finally she softly said, "This matter, let's never mention it again for the rest of our lives." Lu Chen frowned and walked forward. Su Qingjun's countenance suddenly changed, grabbed Lu Chen's arm, stood where she was and stared at this man's eyes, her face revealing nervousness and solemnity. She lowered her voice, using a voice that only she and Lu Chen could hear, said word by word, "Tell me, you did this good deed to save her." Lu Chen looked at Su Qingjun's bright and clear as the bright moon eyes. After a moment, he slowly nodded and said, "I am." Su Qingjun heaved a long sigh of relief, slowly loosened her grip on his arm and then smiled sweetly. This was the first time in this dark night that she smiled happily. Chapter 502. There were no more accidents along the way. After daybreak, the group arrived at Immortal City and returned to Mount Tianlong. Mount Tianlong was where the headquarters of Xianxiameng was located. It was a place that had been in operation for hundreds and thousands of years. Naturally, it was the safest place in the world. There was no need to worry about people from the devil cult jumping out to kill them. They walked all the way to the main hall of Kunlun. Fuyunji's people dispersed. The few leaders still had to report to Shuang. Su Qingjun and the other 3 people from Kunlun party had also completed their task. After a few words of discussion with Lu Chen, they also left. Before leaving, Lu Chen also deliberately glanced at Su Qingjun. He saw that this woman's expression was gentle. She should be in a good mood. When they entered the main hall, they brought the remaining relatives and friends of the Chen family to meet Chen He. Naturally, it was a scene of sorrow and joy. This time, they did not save all of the Chen family. In fact, before they arrived, many people had died. However, the silver lining in the misfortune was that Madame Chen and their 2 children were saved. Then, they were escorted here, safe and sound. Chen He and his wife and children hugged each other and cried. The scene was touching. Then, he looked at his relatives and friends. He found that a few of his closest relatives had passed away. Among them were his parents. At this time, he was angry and sad. He cried and bowed to the ground. Lu Chen watched from the side for a while. Then, he quietly left and walked to the main hall of Kunlun. There was already a jar of good wine in his hand. He leaned on the high doorsill and looked at the distant sky, drinking in big mouthfuls. Old Ma appeared outside the main hall. He walked all the way to the front. When he came near, he first glanced at the wine jar in Lu Chen's hand. Seeing that it was already half empty, he could not help but frown. He said to Lu Chen, "I say, you have been drinking more and more recently. Too much wine is bad for your body." Lu Chen smiled and said, "What kind of body do we cultivators have? Why would we be afraid of wine harming our body? Only ordinary mortals would be bothered by this. It's not a big deal." Old Ma thought about it and found it to be true. Over the years, he had rarely heard of a cultivator's body being damaged because of alcohol addiction. However, he still said, "Even so, getting drunk can indeed confuse one's mind, and it is somewhat detrimental to cultivation. You shouldn't indulge in it." Lu Chen laughed and patted Old Ma's shoulder. "We've been drinking for more than 10 years since we were in Qingshidang village. When did anything happen? Don't worry." "Yes." Old Ma nodded and stopped talking about it. Then, he turned to look at the depths of the hall and said, "How's it going inside?" Lu Chen hugged the wine jar and sat down on the threshold. After a while, he said, "They're probably still comforting those who just escaped from the gates of hell." Old Ma sighed and also sat down beside Lu Chen. He looked up at the sky in the distance and suddenly said after a while, "For people in our line of work, it's probably better not to have family." Lu Chen took a sip of wine and didn't respond. Old Ma didn't care and just said lightly, "Without family and friends, there's nothing to worry about. They won't give others a handle on them, and they won't be overcautious when doing things. Otherwise, even the toughest man will be played by others." Lu Chen smiled and said, "You're right. But is the kind of life you're talking about still a human life?" Old Ma was silent for a while and said, "Whether it's a human life or not, haven't you lived it for decades?" Lu Chen was stunned for a while and then laughed. He stood up and stretched, and suddenly stretched his foot to kick Old Ma. Old Ma smiled and stepped aside. Lu Chen shook his head. His face was calm, but his eyes were deep and no one could see any emotion in them. Old Ma stood with him for a while and then said, "I'll go back and have a look. Now that I've brought his family here, it's time to start doing something big." Lu Chen nodded, but when Old Ma took a few steps, he suddenly called out to him, "Old Ma." "Yes?" Old Ma looked back at him. Lu Chen looked at him and said in a very calm tone, "When you were talking about living alone, you only said, 'you' to me, and not 'we,' as you often said when you were suffering in the village a few years ago." He looked at Old Ma with a faint smile and said, "Do you mean that you're different from me? Do you have any relatives or family?" Old Ma's face changed slightly, and then he laughed and scolded, **T. I've been a bachelor all my life, and it's all because of you." After saying that, he even spat and then walked away. Lu Chen smiled as he watched old Ma's receding figure. After old Ma's figure gradually disappeared, the smile on Lu Chen's face slowly disappeared. It became a little cold, with a hint of bitterness. He turned around and looked at the sky outside the main hall. The bright sky sprinkled on his body, and it seemed to make Lu Chen feel a little uncomfortable, and he slightly narrowed his eyes. He took a step back and stood behind the thick door of the main hall. There was a shadow on the other side, blocking the light, and his expression seemed to be a little relaxed. Then, he thought for a while, picked up the wine jar, and took a big gulp of wine. Then, he muttered to himself, "The person who is hated by gods and devils, I'm talking about you. If one stayed in the dark for too long, he would not be used to the light in the day." Or perhaps, he had long been used to the loneliness in the shadow, if he had never seen the warmth in the light. Like a lonely child who craved that warmth too much, he would subconsciously ask for it, to pursue it, and then forget the shadow behind him. He would unknowingly devour others. When dusk fell again, Chen He, who looked a little tired, followed old Ma out. They walked all the way to the front of the Kunlun main hall and found that Lu Chen did not seem to have the elegance of a perfected lord's successor at the moment. Instead, he sat directly on the ground behind the door, in the somewhat dim shadow, quietly sitting. Beside him, there were 2 empty wine jars. Chen He was stunned for a moment, and old Ma frowned, a little worried. However, the next moment, when Lu Chen looked up at them, his unusually bright and sharp eyes still made their hearts tremble. After a moment, Chen He was the first to react. He took a step forward, bowed to Lu Chen, and said solemnly, "Thank you, young Master Lu, for saving my family, allowing them to escape from disaster. I dare not express my gratitude, but if there is any need in the future, Chen He will definitely serve you with my life." Lu Chen stood up, held him up, patted him on the shoulder, and sighed again. "Speaking of which, I also feel a little guilty. There are still a few relatives and friends in your residence that I did not manage to save. I am sorry." Chen He's eyes were slightly red, and he shook his head. "Young master, don't worry. This is God's will. I am already satisfied to be able to save my wife and my 2 children. As for the rest," he gritted his teeth and said hatefully, "I will repay you in the future." Life was like turning the pages of a book, and the changes were too fast. Lu Chen lightly muttered in his heart, then asked, "How are your wife and the 2 young masters now?" Chen He said, "They have been on the road for a whole night, and they are too frightened, so they are now asleep. However, my wife has mentioned young master to me several times before, only praising young master's righteousness. You saved my family from a life and death crisis, and you are the Chen family's great benefactor. She also urged me to serve young master and avenge my family." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, "Your wife is really a reasonable person." Chapter 503. In the huge underground city of the Immortal City, the days seemed to be similar to the past. Many cultivators in the starry hall of Zhengxianmeng were busy setting up. From afar, they looked like diligent ants, receiving orders and concentrating on completing their mission. The runes and talismans that were gradually taking shape from nothing seemed to be forming a huge formation. However, no one knew what it would be used for in the end. The strange blood moon in the sky was still floating in the air, emitting a blood-red light. However, it would occasionally tremble violently. The red light trembled and swept across the huge space. Perfected Lord Tianlan came to the underground maze again. As expected, he found Perfected Lord Guyu at the huge statue in the center of the city. After greeting him, Perfected Lord Tianlan sat down and looked at the blood moon above him. I looked at it for a while. Why do I feel that the blood moon is a little unstable? Perfected Lord Guyu glanced at him and nodded. You're right. Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his brow and revealed a smile. Does that mean that the day is coming soon? True Monarch Guyu shook her head, and after a moment of silence, she said, this is really hard to say. The blood moon is a strange phenomenon of the heavens and earth. It has its own fiendish intent. It is hard to predict, and there are not many records of it in the ancient books. Even I am unable to calculate it right now. I can only ponder and probe here in hopes that I will be able to discover it a little earlier if there really is a change. As he spoke, he paused for a moment before continuing. The blood moon is indeed a little unstable these few days, and its movements are slowly increasing. From what I can see, it's probably going to enter the turbulent period before it truly changes. However, I'm not sure how long this period will be. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. That's what I should do. Anyway, it's been hard on you. We'll wait for this day to come. Guyu True Monarch suddenly laughed and said, from your tone, it seems like victory is already in your grasp. Although your cultivation is high and you're the strongest in the Immortal Alliance, you can't underestimate your enemy. Perfected Lord Tianlan chuckled. He didn't have any intention of being humble. They're just some useless chickens and dogs. We'll act according to the plan. There's no reason we can't win. Perfected Lord Guyu laughed and pointed at him. He shook his head and didn't say anything else. After a while, he seemed to have thought of something and asked Perfected Lord Tianlan, oh right, how are your subordinates doing with the demonic cult? I heard that your new disciple is doing quite well. Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, what do you mean by doing well? It's just young people messing around. Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, what? It's just the young people messing around. As for the demonic cult, they're doomed. The Devil Sect and our true Immortal Alliance have been fighting for 1,000 years, but now they have declined to such an extent. As he spoke, he revealed a sorrowful look, probably thinking of the heyday of the evil sect. Comparing the two, he could not help but despise the current evil sect. Perfected Lord Tianlan flicked his sleeves, got up, and walked away. At the same time, he said, he's just a clown, not worth mentioning. You, on the other hand, are very important. If there are any major changes, remember to inform me as soon as possible. True Lord Guyu looked at his back and said, don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Seeing Perfected Lord Tianlan leave, Perfected Lord Guyu looked up at the blood moon in the sky and closed her eyes, looking like an old monk in meditation. However, in that strange blood-red light, his originally calm appearance seemed to have an extra hint of coldness and killing intent. In the great hall of Fuyunji, Shuang, Lu Qin, and Qin He sat in a quiet room. Aside from them, there was no one else. At this moment, Qin He's gaze swept across Shui Ying's enchanting, beautiful, yet dignified face. He sighed in his heart. The Floating Clouds Agency had been fighting against the devil cult for many years. As the leader of the Floating Clouds Agency, Shuang was naturally a great enemy of the devil cult. If there was an assassination list, this woman would at least be ranked in the top 3. The blood feud that once would turn hostile and fight to the death the moment they met was now sitting peacefully in this room. Even if they were not joking, it was clear that everyone's goal was the same. That was to get rid of the mysterious elder ghost of the demonic cult. The twists and turns of life were so strange that it was hard to predict. When Lu Qin turned his head to look at Qin He strangely, Qin He suddenly came to his senses and realized that he had been lost in thought just now. He nodded to the man and woman who held great power in front of him, then stretched out his finger and pointed at the map on the table in front of them. Elder Ghost's whereabouts are mysterious and he is naturally suspicious. He almost never meets with ordinary demonic cult members. Instead, every 5 to 7 years, he will train a messenger to take charge of the demonic cult in Immortal City. Of course, I am one of the messengers, Qin He said in a low voice. Lu Qin and Shuang looked at each other, a trace of excitement in their eyes. Qin He's position was indeed unique. After inciting this person, it could be said that they had the demonic cult's throat in their hands. Come to think of it, these few years the evil faction was too weak. The only person who could be on the stage was the mysterious elder ghost. If it was in the heyday of the past, how could there possibly be such a person? Where did he meet you? Lu Qin asked. Shuang, who was sitting on the side, also stared at Chen He, obviously very nervous. Unexpectedly, Chen He smiled bitterly and drew a big circle on the Immortal City map on the table, saying, "Other than the Azure Dragon district of Sky Dragon Mountain where your Xianxia is, I have been called by him to meet the other 3 places, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird and Black Tortoise. Counting carefully, in these few years, I have met him at a total of 63 places." Ah! Lu Chen and Shuang were both shocked and looked at Chen He in disbelief. Chen He continued, "As far as I know, Elder Ghost has a unique characteristic. Even when the divine sect, evil sect was still flourishing, and the other elders were running amok in the world, he was still lurking in the Immortal City. For decades, no matter how the world situation changed, no matter how dangerous it was, he still refused to leave the Immortal City." Lu Chen's heart suddenly moved, and Shuang seemed to have thought of something. After pondering for a moment, she asked Chen He, "Do you know the reason?" Chen He shook his head and said, "I don't know this, and I feel that other than Elder Ghost himself, no one else in the demonic cult knows the reason." Shuang nodded and said no more. Lu Chen then asked, "Then can you find Elder Ghost?" Chen He thought for a moment and said, "In the past, he used a secret technique to tell me where to meet him. Now, it is naturally impossible. But if we check the 63 places we met in the past, we should find those 63 places. He probably gave up after seeing them once or twice." Shuang suddenly interrupted him, her gaze hidden deep, looked at Chen He and said, "But you remember all of them?" Chen He's expression did not change, and he said calmly, "I have a very good memory." Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's a good thing to have a good memory. Come, tell us how we can find that old turtle from these places." Chapter 504. In this world, the human heart was the most unpredictable thing. Most of the time, you would think that you already knew a person's character and behavior very well, but on a certain day, or when something unexpected happened, you would often see some other deeply hidden things that would shock you and make you feel incredulous. Or perhaps, there would be a feeling that the past did not seem real. This kind of thing happened to many people. Some people revealed it, and some people might not have the opportunity to do so in their entire lives. As for whether it was right or wrong, good or bad, it was up to each person to have their own opinions. However, there was a kind of person who was particularly eye-catching when it came to this kind of thing, because this kind of huge change was bound to happen to them. They were patient, tenacious, lurking, and even wearing masks, living a familiar life. But one day, they suddenly threw away their masks, tore off their disguise, and revealed their true colors. Then, they caused pain and shock to everyone around them. This kind of person had a dark and mysterious code name in Xianxia and Fuyunji, called the Shadow. And in the secular world, there was a more common and vulgar and contemptuous name, called the Traitor. Until now, Lu Chen and the others had already discovered that Chen He was a very complicated person. He could be loyal to the so-called God sect and would rather die than submit, but he could also turn hostile and ruthless in the blink of an eye. Moreover, Chen He did not think that he was a traitor. He had his own opinion on this kind of thing. He felt that what Lu Chen had done in the past was a traitor, and he himself had been forced to make this choice when he was at the end of his rope. He felt that he did not disappoint the world or the earth. After all, he had suffered so much for the God sect, but he was still loyal and unyielding. However, those who he had repaid with his life had repaid him by harming his family. This was intolerable. He had no choice but to rely on Xianxia and Fuyunji. It was all those bastards' fault. Of course, the man named Lu Chen had done a lot of things during this period, and his methods were not honorable. However, Chen He was very smart and did not hold a grudge against him. He was the only descendant of the famous Lord Tianlan, and also a new noble in Xianxia. He was an important person who held great power, including the life and death of his whole family. For such a person, he only needed to serve him loyally. It was useless to think about dissatisfaction and resentment. Moreover, his wife had said many good things about Lu Chen. In short, after Chen He put down the knot in his heart and relied on Xianxia, he immediately became a person who could adapt to circumstances. Since he had already decided to rely on Lu Qin, he quickly began to show his ability in front of Lu Qin. He began to lead Lu Qin, Shuaying, and Fuyunji's men to hunt down the remaining evil sect members and the remaining well-hidden spies in the huge immortal city. Yes, even after experiencing so many storms, there were still remnants of the devil sect in the immortal city. This sect that had been passed down for thousands of years still had a deep foundation, and there were still people secretly lurking in the shadows that no one knew about. However, Qin He was not an ordinary follower of the evil sect. His identity was extremely special. He was a messenger that was recently groomed by Elder Ghost. In the immortal city, he had a status that was second only to one and above tens of thousands. In other words, he knew far more secrets about the evil sect than most people. And this time, Qin He seemed to have gone all out. Once he turned hostile, he was even more ruthless than the people of Fuyunji. He mercilessly killed his former comrades, with an attitude of not leaving a single blade of grass behind. Thus, in the immortal city, Fuyunji stirred up another reign of terror. That year, the number of people killed by Fuyunji in the immortal city was said to be unprecedented. Although it was not as exaggerated as a bloodbath, but many people in many places could smell the thick stench of blood. Then, in broad daylight, they saw some ordinary people being dragged out of their homes. Some were beaten up, some were killed on the streets. Then, to the onlookers who looked at each other in shock, they loudly announced that these were the remnants of the evil sect. To show his loyalty, Qin He took the lead in front of Lu Qin and Shuaying, and even personally killed 5 to 6 people. He was very heavy-handed and his methods were very fierce. He looked as if he was afraid that others would think that he did not hate the evil sect sorcerers. Lu Qin and Old Ma had been doing these things for the past few days. They had seen all of Qin He's methods. Most of the time, the two of them did not make a move. The ones charging in front were Qin He and the fierce elites of Fuyunji. They found a place to watch. Old Ma said to Lu Qin in a low voice, "Why do I feel that there is something wrong with this person's heart?" Lu Qin looked forward, his expression did not change. He also lowered his voice and said, "Don't talk nonsense. He is doing things for us." Old Ma sneered and shook his head. "I heard that he still thinks that he has a clear conscience." Lu Qin glanced at him and frowned. "Come on, Qin He has only chosen his own path. Naturally, he has to walk on this path. What's so strange about that?" Old Ma snorted and did not say more about these things. He changed the topic and asked, "Isn't the most important thing now to catch that old tortoise? Why do we keep catching these small fries?" Lu Qin said, "First, these are not small fries. They have hidden themselves so deeply. If it wasn't for Qin He, it would be almost impossible for us to dig them out. And after these people are dug out, the situation that the evil sect has been operating in the immortal city for many years will almost completely collapse. This is very important. Secondly, Elder Ghost is cunning and suspicious. But no matter how he hides his tracks, he is like a mouse. He will always have a territory network. We are cutting off the blocked passages one by one. As long as that old tortoise still insists on not leaving the immortal city, if this goes on, there will soon be a day where he has nowhere to escape to." Old Ma nodded. He did not seem to have much of an objection to Lu Qin's deduction. But after a moment, he suddenly asked curiously, "Say, why do you think that old tortoise Elder Ghost has been refusing to leave the immortal city for so many years?" Lu Qin's eyes flashed slightly and said, "There should be some secret in this big city that attracts him." The two of them looked at each other. After a moment, they suddenly looked down at their feet at the same time. The ground was thick and flat. It extended all the way into the distance. Screams sounded in front of them. Blood splattered everywhere. Fresh blood flowed out from the dead bodies, staining the ground red and seeping into the soil. In the depths of the underground labyrinth, the blood moon flickered a few times. It seemed to be a little unstable. But it soon calmed down again. It emitted a strange blood-red light, shining on the empty and strange city below. After staying here for a few days, Supreme Guyu left today. After all, in the light of the blood moon, it had a lot of bad effects on the cultivators. He needed to take a break for a while. He, a spirit-severing perfected lord, was already like this. The other cultivators of the Starry Hall were naturally affected even more. So after many days, there were much fewer people busy here. At a glance, in the city in the blood light, there were probably less than 20 Starry Hall cultivators working. Compared to this huge city, the number of people was really pitiful. It could be said that there were almost none. It was also under such circumstances, in a quiet house not far from the statue in the center of the city, in a well that had long dried up in the backyard, a light patter suddenly sounded. After a moment, at the bottom of the dark well, a secret door made of a large piece of stone slowly opened. Chapter 505. The mechanism of the secret door was very intricately made. The stone used to make the secret door was not light, but when it was moved, it was almost silent. No one knew which skilled craftsman made it. The dry well was very deep, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. Looking up from the bottom of the well, there seemed to be only a narrow sky. The sky was still blood red. The bright red light of the blood moon could not reach the bottom of the deep dry well, so it was shrouded in darkness. When a dark figure slowly walked out of the darkness, he looked like a ghost. There was a faint light in the darkness. When the figure slowly raised his head, he found that the light was actually a strange fluorescence emitted from his eyes. He raised his head and looked at the small hole high up, as if he was thinking about something. With the help of the weak light, one could vaguely see that the mysterious figure's face was covered with a sinister and strange mask. The next moment, the light suddenly disappeared. The figure stood in the darkness, motionless, like a piece of rotten wood that had been standing there for many years, lifeless. After a while, on the high ground, there was a sudden sound of light footsteps. Then, it seemed that there were two people talking and walking over from not far away. No one approached the lifeless, ordinary, dry well. They did not even take a second look at it. When the footsteps gradually disappeared, the mysterious masked man in the darkness slowly opened his eyes again. The strange fluorescence appeared in the darkness again. He looked coldly at the hole leading to the outside, as if he was deep in thought. "How have you been doing recently?" Supreme Tianlan looked at Lu Chen and asked. At this moment, in the quiet hall of Kunlun, Supreme Tianlan and Lu Chen sat opposite each other. There was no one else around, and both of them were very relaxed. Leaning against the originally solemn lotus throne, Lu Chen held a wine jar in his hand and drank from it from time to time. After hearing Tianlan's words, Lu Chen put down the wine jar in his hand and said, "It's not bad. After Chen he defected to us, he led us to dig out many spies of the evil cult. Except for Elder Ghost, we have basically wiped out the evil cult's forces in Immortal City." As he said that, he paused for a moment before continuing. "Also, during this period of time, the cooperation with the Floating Clouds Company has been going well. However, it won't be that fast. After all, they are all proud soldiers that you personally trained. It won't be that easy for them to submit to you. Anyway, let's wait for a few more days, they are probably slowly accepting me." Supreme Tianlan nodded, looking quite satisfied and said, "You did better than I thought. It seems that my judgment is not bad, at least I didn't misjudge you all these years." Lu Chen clicked his tongue twice, raised his head, and took a big gulp of wine. After swallowing it, he said leisurely, "Actually, it's all thanks to you that I have a backer. When I have nothing to do, I will use you to boost my courage and pressure others. From time to time, I will remind the people of the Floating Clouds Agency that I have you backing me. I am also your only disciple, the future successor of the Foundation. If they don't cooperate with me or don't listen to my orders, I will immediately come back to complain. So, they are probably still afraid of you, so they have no choice but to obey me like this." Supreme Tianlan was startled for a while, then he laughed and slapped his knee. He said with a smile, "Kid, you are indeed black-hearted and thick-skinned. Won't you anger Shuang and the others to death by doing this?" Lu Chen said, "That won't happen. I have always respected Hall Master Shuang and rarely use my power to bully people. I always discuss things calmly. It's only because her subordinates are used to being arrogant that I use this method. Supreme Tianlan smiled and seemed to be in a good mood. He pointed at Lu Chen and said with a smile, "You are probably the only person in the world who dares to do this. How did those people react after you used your power to bully them?" Lu Chen thought for a while and couldn't help but laugh. He said, "Probably disgusted but have no choice but to give in. It's quite fun." As he said this, he looked at Supreme Tianlan and said, "What's wrong? Do you think there's a problem with this method? If you really think it's inappropriate, then I won't use it in the future." Supreme Tianlan rolled his eyes and said, "Use it, continue using it for me. As long as it's effective, use it." Lu Chen seemed to have expected him to say that, so he was not surprised. He just smiled and raised the wine jar to perfected Lord Tianlan to show his respect and gratitude. Then, he continued to drink. True Lord Tianlan didn't care that his disciple had no scruples in front of him. He continued, "If you really follow the rules of this old man's foundation, just like the disciples of the Kunlun sect, who are so serious that they look like saints, it would be strange if you can do anything well in this old man's foundation. Even if I pass the foundation to you in the future, it will probably fail in a few years at most." Lu Chen coughed and reminded Supreme Tianlan, "Don't forget, you are the Grand Emperor and old ancestor of the Kunlun party. Watch your words." Supreme Tianlan glared at him and said, "Bullsh *T, I've been cultivating and fighting for my entire life. Can't I even say something now?" Lu Chen was speechless. After a while, he waved his hand and said helplessly, "All right, all right, all right. You're a soul formation perfected lord. You're amazing. You can indeed say whatever you want," perfected Lord Tianlan chuckled. Of course, there was no real anger in his eyes when he looked at Lu Chen. Instead, there was a hint of admiration and gratification. "Kid, work hard. I have high hopes for you." Lu Chen rolled his eyes and couldn't help but shudder. "What do you mean by that? Do you feel like you've encountered something and you want to make arrangements for your funeral? That's scary." Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed out loud with an extremely carefree expression. He then said proudly, "Who in the world can go against me?" Lu Chen also laughed and looked at the damn baldy with a strange gaze. After a while, he sighed and said, "I say, I've been drinking all day today. Why do I feel like you're a little drunk? I'm happy that I have a great future ahead of me." Supreme Tianlan said, "But now, it seems like you're the only one I can chat with in the world. It's the right decision to take you in as my disciple. We've barely seen each other in the past 10 years. Now, we can often have a chance to chat alone like this. It's not bad." Lu Chen was slightly surprised. He looked at Supreme Tianlan as if he didn't expect such a high and mighty figure to say something like that to him. However, were those words from the bottom of his heart? Should he believe it? Lu Chen didn't know. He only saw that the person in front of him was living a happy life and had an intimidating aura. He was at the peak of a person's life and even Lu Chen couldn't help but feel respect for him. If there were no gods in the world, then Supreme Tianlan should be the person closest to a demigod right now, right? If there were gods in the world, such as those worshipped by the devil sects, then this damn baldy would probably be the person who had the highest chance of defeating them. It was probably no wonder that he was so arrogant given how talented and powerful he was and how he looked down on the world. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard Supreme Tianlan ask him again, "By the way, I heard that you've been drinking more and more recently. Is there something wrong with you?" Lu Chen was stunned and suddenly frowned. "How did you know about that? Could it be that old ma told you?" Chapter 506. Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, "You're just like a drunkard. Everyone can see how you're drinking when you're free. Why do you need him to tell me?" Lu Chen heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Don't worry, it's just that I've been fond of drinking recently. It won't cause any trouble, and it won't harm my body." Of course, I won't become addicted to alcohol. In all these years, there haven't been any cultivators who ruined their cultivation because of alcohol, right? Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him for a moment and said, "That's true. However, things like alcohol and women are ultimately not beneficial to cultivation. Excessive drinking is also harmful. Even if others see it and talk about it behind your back, it's not appropriate for you. You should drink less." Lu Chen snorted and said, "Just now, you were acting like you didn't care about anything in the world. Why is it that when it comes to me, you suddenly have to care about how other people look at you?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, "You're not a soul formation perfected lord, so you don't have to think about these things." Lu Chen was speechless. After a while, he waved his hand and said, "Fine, fine, fine. You're good. I think there's a saying that's very suitable for the current situation. Do you know what it is?" Old Ma asked Lu Chen with a smile. It seemed like another day had passed. It was dusk. They were walking on the mountainside of Sky Dragon Mountain. The sun was setting and the sky was filled with the afterglow. It looked very beautiful. "Catch a turtle in a jar?" Lu Chen said without turning his head. Old Ma was stunned for a moment. Then, he smiled and said, "That's exactly what I mean. You're smart." Lu Chen shrugged and said, "But we still haven't caught that old turtle." Old Ma smiled optimistically and said, "That's fine. I didn't have much hope for it at first. However, ever since I heard that Elder Ghost refused to leave Immortal City, it's only a matter of time." Lu Chen nodded and did not object. In the past, they couldn't do anything to these evil sect spies and ghost elders who were hiding in the Immortal City. That was because they were hiding too deep and their whereabouts were unpredictable. Even the experienced Fuyunji couldn't catch them. But now, firstly, there was Chen He, the traitor who almost knew countless of the evil sect's secrets, and secondly, they knew that Elder Ghost could not leave the Immortal City for some unknown reason, so the situation was completely different. He did not even urge Chen He, because the current situation was that Fuyunji was gradually tightening the encirclement, pulling out the evil faction's hidden nails one by one, and Elder Ghost, this old tortoise's hiding place and leeway, would eventually become smaller and smaller, until there was no way to escape. For thousands of years, this was probably the most embarrassing and most critical moment for the evil cult. Life and death, there was only a thin line. Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen from the side. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Not long ago, this man seemed to have secretly discussed with him whether to secretly leave this immortal city, and then wander the world to live a carefree life. Alright, that was a nice way to put it. It was more likely to be to drag out an ignoble existence. But now, the situation was completely different. He'd ascended to the heavens in a single step, and shockingly, he'd become a powerful and influential figure in the true Immortal Alliance. Everyone raised their eyebrows, and his name shook the world in a single day. His future was bright, and the changes in his circumstances were so great that it truly caused others to feel as if they were dreaming. Looking at his current high-spirited look, who could still think of the loneliness when he was frustrated in the past? Feeling good, right? Old Ma couldn't help but still ask Lu Chen. Lu Chen, on the other hand, didn't understand and said, "What?" Old Ma asked, becoming the true monarch's successor, now holding great power, "Is this life comfortable? Is your mood good?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "It's okay, a little better than a few days ago." Nonsense. Old Ma scolded with a smile, but in his heart, he was also happy for him. It was just that in addition to the joy, there was also a faint sense of loss in the depths of his heart. For so many years, Lu Chen had practically always been together with him. They had gone through tough times, seen blades and swords, and walked through the gates of hell. But in the end, the fate of the two of them was as different as heaven and earth. Why was this? Were people always different from each other? But where was the source of this unfairness? He thought indifferently, then said goodbye to Lu Chen, turned around and left. Lu Chen's identity and status were now different from before, that incomparably noble Kunlun Palace, except for the supreme true monarch Tianlan. He now had the qualifications to live in that incomparably noble Kunlun Palace. But old Ma didn't have that qualification. He was just a person who had lurked in the Jianghu for many years, accompanying by Lu Chen's side as a messenger. So in the end, he could only live outside. For so many years, if Lu Chen was the shadow, then what was old Ma? Old Ma thought, I'm probably the shadow of the shadow. More indifferent than the shadow, and less sense of existence than the shadow. The shadow might have the opportunity to leave a black shadow on a sunny day, but from beginning to end, he was only silent. For a person like him, even if he was killed in a legend, it would only be a few strokes of the brush, like a ripple on the surface of the water. There would be almost no movement, not to mention the stormy waves that would be set off by those big shots. Silent in life and silent in death? Is this the life you want? Is this the destiny you are destined to live? Old Ma stopped in his tracks and glanced back. The tall mountain peak was like a giant, silently looking down at him, perhaps with a bit of contempt. Under the afterglow of the setting sun, the majestic shadow shrouded everything, and gradually disappeared into the darkness. Old Ma thought silently for a long time, finally sighed softly, turned around and walked into the gradually falling night. Is there anyone in this world, at this time, who will still be dead set on following the Devil's sect, or even join the Devil's sect? Almost at the same time, in that room on Tianlong Mountain, White Lotus sat on the bed and asked Su Qingjun this question. Su Qingjun laughed in spite of herself and said, of course there won't be, even if there is, it would be a madman, or a fool. White Lotus shrugged her shoulders and did not say anything, but Su Qingjun suddenly made a sound of surprise and looked up and down at this young girl. White Lotus felt a little strange being looked at by her, said, everything is fine. Why are you suddenly looking at me like this? Su Qingjun smiled and said, probably because you have been with Lu Chen for a long time, I feel that some of your actions are very similar to him. White Lotus was startled for a moment, then sneered and said, nonsense, how can I be like him? Su Qingjun also felt that it was not possible, laughed, walked to White Lotus and sat down, stretched out her hand and gently stroked her soft hair. This action was intimate and gentle. White Lotus did not have any intention to resist or avoid. It seemed that during this period of time, the relationship between these two girls had become very close. After a while, Su Qingjun softly asked, your injury is considered to be almost healed. Why are you still not willing to let me tell Lu Chen? White Lotus suddenly felt nervous, looked at her and said, don't tell me you have already told him. Su Qingjun shook her head and said, not yet, you little girl, 2 days ago you even threatened me, saying that if I say that your injury is healed, you will immediately stab yourself a few more times and make your injury worse. You have already said such words, how can I dare to say it? White Lotus forced a smile, looking a little embarrassed, then sighed and said, I really have something difficult to say, can you help me hide it for a few more days? Su Qingjun nodded, then immediately frowned and said, what are you afraid of? Don't tell me Lu Chen is really behind my back, threatening you in any way, or... White Lotus immediately shook her head and said, oh, that is not, Suddenly, White Lotus's words were abruptly cut off. The pair of eyes that had been calm and clean for a long time, lit up a bit. She looked at Su Qingjun's beautiful face, suddenly revealing a trace of a strange smile. Su Qingjun was surprised and said, what's wrong? White Lotus was silent for a moment, then slightly smiled and said softly, if I say, Lu Chen really has bad intentions towards me, and even has the guts to do it, would you believe me? What? Su Qingjun lost her voice, her complexion changed, and suddenly stood up. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.